Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. I do apologize, brothers and sisters, for those been waiting in the chat. First of all, I'd like to thank Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for giving us this opportunity to meet again. And then, of course, I'd like to thank the people who constantly be here and watch our streams. I really appreciate your support and your views. There's so many people in the chat already. MashaAllah, it's great to see. There's quite a few non-Muslims in the chat, so it's also nice to have you here. And of course, I've got a bit of a rusty voice, so I do apologize for that. I hope my audio is good. But like I said, we're joined today on a very, very special moment, and also a very interesting and passionate topic that has taken place recently, and everybody is viewing it across the world, across the globe. And the weird thing is, brothers and sisters, here in the UK and where I'm based, there's certain media outlets who refused to play the arguments against the genocide that's taking place in Gaza right now. There's many media platforms who did not play the arguments against Israel and the crimes that the IDF are playing out in real time right now. But they played the second part of the Israeli side of their counter arguments, which were very weak and fragile, without no doubt. But nevertheless, I'm joined again. With me is Brother Adnan from Kuwait, who recently just come back from making Umrah, mashallah, on a road trip. Mashallah, Brother Adnan, thank you for joining me.
Jazakallah khair, Sheikh. May Allah protect you, alhamdulillah. And may Allah bless our Sheikh Yusuf. Jazakallah khair.
Thank you, Brother Adnan. And of course, our special guest today is our brother Yusuf Ismail from South Africa, a very profound speaker in the early days, especially in my early days, or my young days. And I still record Brother Yusuf debating these so-called evangelists and these haters, and the way Yusuf used to debate them and with confidence and so much proof. It was amazing to watch back in those days, mashallah. Yusuf, you haven't aged a day. MashaAllah, you look fantastic. Assalamu alaikum.
Jazakallah khair, Brother Muhammad and Brother Adnan. Really, I feel overwhelmed by these compliments. And, at the end of the day, we leave the glory to Allah. And, as we find in the Quran, وَمَا عَلَيْنَا إِلَّا الْبَلَاغُ الْمُبِينَ, our duty is just simply plain conveyance of the message. Allah, I always take this, when we are younger and much younger, there's a feel-good factor when you are involved in debates and so on. And there's just that thin level whereby it can veer towards, some degree of self-aggrandizement. And I always remind myself, or I try to at the very least, and I have over the years, that at the end of the day, it's not us as individuals. Allah is the being who gives hidayah, and we're just simply conveyors of the message. He doesn't need us, we need him. And we are just simply there to fulfill the Quranic dictum of Udu ila sabili rabbika bil hikmah wal mau'izati al hasanati wajadilhum billati ahsan. And that's for everybody out there. As the late Sheikh Didat once used to say it quite regularly, it's a time, when it comes to da'wah, it's a time for every man. There were books where you could do tools for every man out there. And he always made the analogy and the example. You don't need to be a specialist or some sort of wali or alim or greatest student. You basically need to be a Muslim, a believing Muslim. Even if you know one word, ballighu anni walau ayah, it's your duty to convey that. And so I think it's important that we see that at the end of the day. So it's fantastic to be with you, brothers. I love you, brothers. I'm glad Brother Nazam, I don't know if he's here, introduced me to you. I love your humility, because on a lot of these platforms, sometimes, fortunately, unfortunately, whether it's Christian, whether it's Muslim, whatever, I see that there's a lot of egotistical antics that I'd play, and that's it's a kind of a polemic that's at play, and I don't see that. I see the sincerity of your brothers, and I really appreciate the work and the effort that that you brothers do in the United Kingdom and elsewhere. And I'm just glad to be part of that initiative, and I'm glad that you can have me on this program to share a few of my thoughts and experiences. So Jazakallah khair, and thank you to all of you.
No, mashallah, that's I'm actually humbled by you now, brother Yusuf. Jazakallah khair for those kind words. But yes, I think as brothers and sisters who watch these streams, we don't go for entertainment. We don't go for that. And everybody who knows me for since I've been doing podcasting, they always say that this channel is really underrated. It's because the fact that I don't really do it for monetary gains or fame or anything like that whatsoever. Is for the akhirah, that we have to stand in front of our Lord, our Creator, and we have to answer to everything that we say and what we do. So it's very important to stay humble and stay focused upon the goal. The goal is nothing in this life, it's the next life, and this is what we all aid for. And I'm just a side point, brothers and sisters. Recently, I became a grandfather, and I was just holding my granddaughter the other day, and I was thinking maybe when she's 16, 17, she'll say, when she watches some of our videos on YouTube and stuff, and say that was my grandfather, and and maybe she'll make a supplication for me or some type of dua for me. And this is what all I ask for, is that when we leave this earth and when we leave this dunya, that people will say nice things about us. And do you remember such and such, so he did this and this, instead of negative stuff. So this is what I try to leave, is good footprints before we go on to our next journey. But I do apologize for that monologue. And but nevertheless, brothers and sisters, we have got a very interesting topic. And I really want to hand over the microphone to our beloved brother, Yusuf Ismail. Brother Yusuf, go ahead.
Jazakallah, alhamdulillah, wassalatu wassalam ala rasulillah wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in. Amma ba'd, a'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajim. Bismillahir rahmanir rahim. Rabbi shrah li sadri wa yassir li amri wahlul 'uqdatan min lisani yafqahu qawli. Sadaqallah, sadaqallahu al-azim. Now, I just want to start off. Thanks to the brother Muhammad, thanks to brother Adnan, thanks to those listeners out there. And we want to wish all of you, including our non-Muslim guests, greetings of peace. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Now, further to our last discussion that we had I believe, a very comprehensive discussion on what's taking place in Israel. And most of you are probably familiar with the application that I can proudly say has been brought by South Africa, my country, where they've proceeded with an application instituting proceedings, and they proceeded to prepare during the November-December vacation, I believe the latter part of November, December, with a comprehensive documentation in writing to the Registrar of the International Court of Justice that they wished, in accordance with Article 36(1) and Article 40 of the Statute of the Court and Article 38 of the Rules of the Court, to submit the application proceedings for and on behalf of the Republic of South Africa against the State of Israel. Now, what surprises me, and I want to put this out, you say that a lot of the, and I'm aware of that because we were also told that in the United Kingdom, you must have seen that, I think it was just 2 weeks ago, on the 11th and 12th of January, that's a Thursday and a Friday, we had these hearings that took place at The Hague. That's where the International Court of Justice is based. That was formerly the World Court. And the application that instituted the proceedings was accompanied by an 84-page document. Now, what is surprising to me, and I've seen a lot of discussions on some of your programs like Channel 4, there's this chap called Krishnan, a lot of discussions on LBC, a lot of discussions on BBC. For some reason, Piers Morgan, the infamous Piers Morgan, hasn't to date, to my knowledge, discussed the proceedings at The Hague. But none of the presenters seem to have been equipped or armed with this 84-page documentation. After this program, I will basically email the complete documentation, and then Brother Muhammad could upload it on his YouTube channel. So for listeners out there who wish to then download it in a PDF format, they will be then armed and equipped with what I would call this, the equivalent of a combat kit against the State of Israel. with apologies to Ahmed Didat's combat kit, which basically lays down the foundations and the basis for this particular application. Because since this application has been brought by the South African government, there have been allegations leveled against South Africa, quite unsurprisingly, although without any form of justification, that South Africa is operating as an arm of Hamas, as a legal defense wing of Hamas, as an arm of the Iranian state. All of that total bogus and no justification whatsoever. But the reason why these allegations are being made is because of the fact that the substance and the content of this documentation cannot be effectively dealt with. None of to date, I have not seen no single media outlet that has justifiably, at least even from those that are proponents of Israel or support Israel, like Sky News Australia, and I mean, which does it at a far more vicious level, unlike, for example, the restrained support that you get from outlets like BBC and CNN and Sky News, and that might also be changing. But none of them analyze this particular document. So what I've done this morning, albeit at a very quick pace, and please forgive if the documentation is not fully completed, but I've prepared a PowerPoint presentation for purposes of taking some of the salient features that have been discussed in this document and that were used as argumentation by the various counsel at the International Court of Justice. I may add one thing, that one of the counsel, Professor Max Duplessis, personally taught us. He was an alumni from the University of Natal, where I studied. He taught us human rights law. I think it was 2003, 2004. Professor John Dugard is the global authority on public international law. He's probably close to his 80s. He was the elderly gentleman, the oldest of the council that were arguing the case, and his textbook on international law is a standard textbook for all of us in South Africa, and indeed for a large number of jurists and academics in different parts of the world. And I wouldn't be surprised that a lot of the judges and presiding judicial officers at the International Court of Justice would have studied John Dugard. Even the opposition, the noted opposition that Israel had, which is a British barrister, Malcolm Shaw, would be well familiar with that. We had two King's Counsels, two barristers on our side. One was an individual that is practicing at Temple Bar in London and an academic, and also regularly appears at the International Court of Justice, Vaughan Lowe, Professor Vaughan Lowe. There was another lady, I forget her name, but she was bilingual, addressing the audience in the panel of judges in both French and the substance of argumentation in English. And of course, you then had a litany of junior counsel from our side. From the Israeli side, I'm not familiar at all with any of the counsel, the agents or the representatives, with the exception of Malcolm Shaw, who we've heard of, but and he's quite regularly at the International Court of Justice. But beyond that, I'm not familiar with the other side's legal team. What I can say is, from an academic point of view, and certainly having seen some of the analysis being made on a lot of the programs, the South African legal team was appeared to be well respected, at least from an academic perspective. Even before this application, they are well known, and South Africa produced a solid application. That's all I can say. They produced a solid application. There were certain technicalities that may not have been fulfilled by them, which I'll probably address, particularly in relation to the fact that parties can come to the International Court of Justice, but only after they've established a proper dispute. And Israel had made the argument that there was no formal dispute between the parties, which needed some form of resolution prior to them approaching the International Court of Justice. But besides that, the substance of the argumentation was second to none. I could find no fault of it. They go even to the extent of these so-called useless polemics, which we shouldn't waste our time with, that they are a legal armed defense wing of Hamas, which is what the Israeli spokespeople have been saying on a lot of your platforms. That, in fact, is belied by the very notion that in the introduction of this particular paper, on the introduction, they basically state, South Africa states that they unequivocally condemn all violation of international law by all parties, including, if it arises, the direct targeting of Israeli civilians and other nationals and hostage taking by Hamas or other Palestinian armed groups. No armed attack on a state's territory, no matter how serious, even an attack involving atrocity crimes, can, however, provide any possible justification for or defense to the breaches of the crimes of genocide. So unlike many of us, unlike myself, and I've had strong views of what Hamas stands for, and I certainly support armed resistance against the Israeli state. The South African legal team did not go down that route. They've made that disclaimer at the outset, and even in their documentation, they disassociated any actions, if there were direct targeting of civilians that were done by Hamas. They've totally disassociated themselves from that particular issue. So to describe them as a legal defense wing of Hamas is totally ridiculous. I see there's a comment in the point about Mahdi Ahmadi, the lady that did an opening statement for South Africa was excellent. Yes, her name is Advocate Adila Hassan. She's a senior counsel. And certainly she made a fine presentation dealing with a lot of the substantive content on what is happening on the ground. And certainly the comment is that Israel did not come with anything. I may also point this out, that whilst we produced an 84-page documentation, 84 pages, and it's comprehensive. If it's put in a book form, it's in such small print, but if it's put in a book form, it will be nothing under 200 pages, and it's accompanied by 500 footnotes. So there's an 84-page documentation accompanied by 500 footnotes, and they don't rely on footnotes from just simply newspapers or reports from Reuters or Associated Press, which is what the Counsel for Israel, Malcolm Shaw, attempted to suggest when he was looking. They footnote directly from UN sources, from human rights sources, from the looking at the various legislation, looking at the General Assembly reports of the special rapporteurs on the situation of human rights in the Palestinian territories, in the occupied territories. They go into detail with it. So, Brother Muhammad, if we can open out my PowerPoint, and then we could go through some of the issues. Then, if we could probably just expand the PowerPoint and just make it slightly bigger. Yeah, that'll be fine. If you can make it bigger, even bigger, that's fine. But I think for the time being, it'll suffice. So, this is what we're going to deal with: the Gaza genocide and the ICJ. If you go to the second slide, firstly, I discuss what is the International Court of Justice. The International Court of Justice, also formerly called the World Court, was one of the 6 principal organs of the United Nations. And it essentially settles disputes between states in accordance with international law and gives advisory opinions on international legal issues. The International Court of Justice is distinct, I may add, from the International Criminal Court. Because at the ICJ, particularly if you have had a look at the discussion that was done by Israel, or the response, which was not reduced by writing, it was just simply an oral presentation. There was no written response by Israel. They never produced anything to date. None of it is being done to writing. They raised the issue about Hamas. Now, Hamas could not be tried, and people are asking the question about Hamas. Hamas cannot be tried at the International Court of Justice because, number one, from a technical point of view, they are a non-state actor, meaning they are not subjected to be bound to the rules and regulations of the International Court of Justice. They're not a signed signatory like the State of Israel or the South African government for that particular matter. So South Africa and the State of Israel has tied itself up. So, when I hear, for example, Elon Levi, this boy that basically is being interviewed by a chap called Krishnan with mild questions on the ICJ about what will Israel do if, for example, the ICJ makes an interim finding, not a final finding, but an interim finding, that there needs to be a ceasefire because of the fact that a number of the actions that are being committed could possibly fall within the definition of being considered genocidal in nature. What was his response to that? He says he doesn't want to contemplate a world of absurd hypotheticals. What rubbish is that? A world of absurd hypotheticals when the vast majority of international lawyers and experts, like, for example, Professor Francis Boyle, who was one of the first individuals that brought his case to the International Court of Justice a decade and a half ago. A lot of these legal experts out there are saying that in all likelihood, the ICJ may possibly rule against Israel at the interim level, and in particular pertaining to the fact that it would recommend and demand a ceasefire. What's Israel going to do in such a situation? So they have no answer in relation to that, and they haven't answered pertaining to that. So coming to the point is, just to get the disclaimer, Hamas is not a party to this. Number one, if you want to take up Hamas on war crimes, then essentially go to the International Criminal Court, which is a separate forum. But that cannot be dealt with at the International Court of Justice. International Court of Justice is something which is adjudicating general disputes between countries and signatories, with its rulings, forming the basis of international law. And just to give a kind of a brief history, the ICJ does in fact go a long time ago. It was a successor to the Permanent Court of International Justice, which was established in 1920. And after the Second World War, the League and the Permanent Court of International Justice were replaced by the United Nations and what is now known as the ICJ at this particular juncture. And so all member states of the UN at this juncture, the UK, United States, South Africa, State of Israel, are party to the ICJ statute and may, of course, initiate any legal issues. And of course, advisory proceedings may only be submitted by certain UN organs and states. So South Africa thought this application well before they proceeded, and certainly they grounded it on proper terms. They never engaged in what one would describe as atrocity propaganda, which is what Israel attempted to do. Atrocity propaganda is the idea, and by the way, Israel has got nothing to show except the 43 minutes, which is showing people shooting and hostages being taken away. But beyond that, South Africa could have gone to town with the kind of atrocities being shown in real time and before our very eyes. And that could have been would have been acceptable. But they never went that particular route. They took a far more restrained route, a far more nuanced route, where they just simply dealt with the key legal issues, the facts on the ground, and the substance of their particular application. And I think they made a fantastic case in relation to that it never went over the top, and they never engaged in what we would call a show and tell. So these attacks against South Africa, lambasting it and basically describing it as ludicrous. I think it was I'm not so sure, Anthony Blinken or the White House spokesman or chief of staff, who basically described the application as frivolous or silly. He obviously never went through this document. None of them have gone through this particular document, because if you go through this particular document, there is no way out. There's absolutely no way out. They've covered themselves completely. And so what I've done in this particular panel is, before I just wrap up this discussion on the ICJ, is that I've extracted key and salient points from this particular document, and we'll go through some of them. So, how many on the judiciary? The ICJ consists of 15 judges that's elected by the UN Assembly, and they, in fact, have a 9-year term. They're seated in the Peace Palace in The Hague, and that's the only principal UN organ that is not, in fact, situated or located in New York City. The chair of that particular judiciary happens to be an American. And certainly, if you look at the final arbiter and the final decision that are being made, or the decisions going either way, in fact, eventually to decide whether genocide has been committed or not, will be done by the members of the judiciary. Whether they will basically find Israel guilty of genocide or not, well, I mean, there are 15 judges. You're looking at the United States, who's the chair. You're looking at the United Kingdom. You're looking at Russia and China, who in the long term may elect not to vote because there are allegations against them. You're looking at countries like, for example, Uganda, that have been pro-Israel for a number of years. You're looking at, for example, countries such as Germany, which has now stated that from its legal perspective, it wishes to join the proceedings in opposing the application against that South Africa has brought. And what's the other countries? Yeah, there's a couple of countries, but so far I've given you 5. I've got 6. I've given you 6 countries that that may possibly veer in favor of Israel. That's the United States, your country, the United Kingdom. I've given you Russia and China that are members of the permanent UN Security Council that may elect not to vote on the basis of the fact that there are allegations against them. You've got Uganda, you've got the African country, you've got Germany, and you've got France. You don't know where France stands because France has taken a position, at least at the interim level, that wants a ceasefire. But in the long term, in terms of whether it will find that Israel is guilty of genocide, that's again something to be seen. But I've given you, out of the 15, I've already given you 7 already. And so this basically shows you that whilst judges and the members of the judiciary are meant to apply their judicial legal minds, this is also very much a political process at this level, at the highest level. It's very much a political process. And at the end of the day, let's assume you've got an order of ceasefire. How does one implement it? What if Israel states, well, look, we can't follow this, we can't follow through? What then happens? Certainly it'll be isolated. What will happen to the United States and the UK? Will they follow suit? Will they then also choose to disobey and not agree with the findings of the International Court of Justice if there's an interim ruling, a ruling in favor against Israel? What happens to the members of the European Union or the members of the European Commission that are also signatories of the ICJ? What happens then? So as much as Israel is on trial, in inverted commas, the ICJ is on trial, because the ICJ is working a tightrope. And I think I very much hope that the judges, in fact, end up reading this document, because what you saw presented in the documentation by the South African team was just simply a summary of some of the key salient features on this. This goes into far more comprehensive detail, and I only hope and pray that the judges read this. But whilst and we can only hope that justice prevails and stands at the end of the day. I don't believe that Israel has any case, and they made a poor performance, and this can be seen by a lot of the analysts that have been looking at and assessing this particular matter globally. I've even seen the discussion between Judge Andrew Napolitano and Professor Jeffrey Sachs, who was at Cambodia, the famous writer of the book, The End of Poverty. And they clearly made a point that Israel did not provide anything of substance. There was nothing. And, it went back. I think we had our discussion before this particular hearing, the first discussion that you, brother, myself, Brother Muhammad, and one of the other brothers had. I think Brother Adnan was there about a week or two before this particular hearing. And the points that we raised in terms of the defense that Israel normally states, human shields, they either deny it and or they basically state that there's a mistake. And these were the 3 points when it came to the substance of the actual inquiry pertaining to the atrocities and the massacres that we are seeing in real time. Those are the points that they raise. So they can't move outside this 3-legged tool. There was nothing unique made. And of course, they raised the issue about October 7th, which was not the issue, because October 7th was not the point. Hamas was not the particular focal point. And unfortunately, this was not an inquisitorial process. It was very much adversarial. If it was inquisitorial, like the French legal system, the judges would have shut him down and stopped him in the tracks. But unfortunately, they allowed them to continue with this particular mantra of the involvement of Hamas and attempting to provide some form of contextualization, which was not needed, because you don't need contextualization to justify genocide. Genocide can never be justified under any terms, regardless of whether there were atrocities committed by the other side or not. If you have an issue with Hamas or with other of the Palestinian resistance movement, the forum for that inquiry would be to take them to the International Criminal Court and have them tried for war crimes, which is not what Israel is concerned in doing. They're not concerned about that. They're just simply concerned in eradicating everybody, mowing the lawn, as Norman Finkelstein has basically pointed out, mowing the entire lawn, and they've basically gone beyond mowing the particular lawn. They've destroyed the land, they've destroyed everything that has basically transpired and has happened on that particular day. So that's basically what I've got in relation to that particular thing. So here's the situation. So the ICJ consists of a panel of 15 judges. They at the Peace Palace. The one important point is that the convention, which they've cited, the Genocide Convention, that's an international treaty that criminalizes genocide. It obligates state parties to basically pursue the enforcement of its prohibition. And it was entered into force on the 12th of January 1951. 152 state parties as of 2022 are signatories to that convention, including Israel. So if you've got a state that is a signatory to that, it signed the Genocide Convention, it is bound by that, it is bound and a signatory to the ICJ. It cannot basically come and say, well, look, we now are going to not be party to this, which is what Israel may possibly do, but then it becomes a pariah. So from a moral point of view, where does that leave Israel? It's totally destroyed in the long term. Article 2 of the Genocide Convention defines it as follows. National, ethnic, any act committed with an intent to destroy in whole or in part a national, ethnic, racial, or religious group, killing members of the group, causing serious bodily or mental harm, deliberately inflicting on the group conditions of life, causing its physical destruction, imposing measures, or forcibly transferring children of the group to another group. South Africa went through every single comment that you've got there, every single point, and they justified every single point, and they came with copious evidence to devastation on every single point. And in this document, it is spelled out in complete and utter detail. Every single point was covered completely. Article 3 defines the crimes that can be punished under the convention. Genocide, which is what the South African government is seeking to hold Israel to. Conspiracy to commit genocide or planning. Direct and public incitement to commit genocide. Attempts to commit genocide. Complicity in genocide. Again, they went through every single point from A to E, and they copiously articulated their point in detail, accompanied by hundreds of footnotes, completely in detail. And it's done here. It's done, of course, in their presentation. Israel had absolutely no response to that, no response. Of course, you would see the response by, I think, one of the ladies and Professor Malcolm Shaw. Malcolm Shaw attempted to raise issues of the jurisdiction. And, of course, the fact that South Africa never established a dispute between itself and Israel, which is what normally happens. You have to have a dispute between the two before they essentially come and bring the matter to the ICJ. And again, Israel never basically responded to that in kind or in argumentation. Absolutely nothing whatsoever. And so that's where we stand at that particular. So now, what are South Africans' submissions at the ICJ? For those who have never read the document or have never seen the particular footage, I urge you to go. I will also send you a link which can be uploaded then on the Brother Muhammad's channel. He'll probably put up the link once this is fully downloaded on YouTube with the application, as well as a link to the complete arguments that have been made by South Africa. But essentially what South Africa is alleging, and this is borne out in its application, is that Israel is committing genocide against the Palestinians in the Gaza Strip in violation of the Genocide Convention. And that has to be viewed in a broader context, including the 75-year apartheid, the 56-year occupation, and the 16-year blockade of the Strip. And South Africa has basically requested at the interim that the ICJ render an immediate provisional measure of protection by issuing an order to Israel to immediately suspend its military operations in and against Gaza. So it's not seeking a temporary ceasefire. It's seeking an immediate ending, pending, of course, the finding as to whether Israel has, of course, committed genocide. And then eventually that will basically be borne out by the members that have basically allowed this to essentially happen. This is directly from the written application, and this is what South Africa states. So the application concerns acts threatened, adopted, and condoned, taken and being taken by the government and the military of the State of Israel against the Palestinian people, a distinct national, racial, and ethnical group in the wake of the attacks in Israel on the 7th of October. South Africa unequivocally condemns all violation of international law by all parties, including the direct targeting of Israeli civilians and other nationals and hostage taking by Hamas and other Palestinian armed groups. Now, if you look at the press conference that was conducted by Israel after the presentation by South Africa, there was a slight and attack against the South African legal team, as if they are now the legal team for Hamas. This is the mantra that is out there, and this is obviously borne out by the fact that in itself is rubbished by the state of South Africa in the fact that it's not even qualifying or justifying the attacks. It even goes on to say, and here I may have some issue with the South African position, that no armed attack on a state's territory, no matter how serious, even an attack involving atrocity crimes, can, however, provide any possible justification for the defense of the breaches of the Genocide Convention. Now, the point which I'm taking issue with is no armed attack on a state's territory. South Africa is going one step ahead by suggesting that, yes, there was a territorial invasion by Hamas on the 7th of October. However, from the Palestinian point of view and from the international law point of view, that area of the Gaza Strip was under Israeli occupation. It's not an autonomous country. It's not an autonomous state, which the international community, which the United States, which the hypocritical government of Rishi Sunak would want people to believe, or David Cameron for that particular matter. It was not a one sovereign territory or a group, a non-state actor from a sovereign territory entering another sovereign territory. It were people from an occupied land, which is part of the greater Israel, which is occupied by Israel, just simply entering area of land from which they were kicked out as refugees. That area in the kibbutz Birei and the southern part of Israel, where these attacks apparently took place, and as we've looked at the last time, a lot of these attacks were conducted by the IDF, by the Israeli Defense Force, by Israeli Apache helicopter gunships that had burnt the entire parking lot, the cars, the houses, civilians, everybody. But that area were areas and were previously known as villages. There was, I believe, at the kibbutz Beri, they check this up in history, there's an area, a village, a Palestinian village called Najd. That village was totally decimated during the initial formation of the State of Israel. And the refugees and the descendants of those refugees and those people that entered there were going back to their particular land. So from their perspective, this is not and should not be viewed as a sovereign invasion of somebody else's territory. This was their land, and they are refugees and had gone into the area of the land from which their ancestors, their grandfathers and fathers had in fact been kicked out. These were formerly the kibbutz was, and the settlements that you see there were settlements and settlers. And here I'm making a distinction between the traditional understanding of settlers that you see on the West Bank and these settlements here as the kind of Israeli civilians, that they had settled on area which were formerly graveyards and formerly massacres that were committed by the IDF and by the predecessors like Irgun and the Haganah. So that's where these people had come on. So let's make that clear. This was not an armed attack on another state's territory, even though the South African government has conceded that point. This was a question of people coming, crossing the line, and coming from territory occupied by them onto territory from which they had been previously kicked out. Whether that is justifiable, whether that justifies killings or atrocities, that's another debate entirely, but that's not the issue. But I'm saying that South Africa takes a neutral position. So you can quite clearly see that this document in itself is not a pro-Palestinian document. It's not a pro-Hamas document. It's not even a pro-Palestinian document. It just simply takes into account the facts on the particular ground. We go on to this document, and it says that the acts in question include killing of Palestinians in Gaza. The acts are all attributable to Israel, which has failed to prevent genocide and is committing genocide in manifest violation of the Genocide Convention, including failing to prevent or punish the direct and public incitement to genocide by senior Israeli officials and others. Now, and we'll come to that closely, but if you, for example, look at previous genocides that took place, the one that comes to mind is, for example, the which I studied some years back when I was doing international law, studying international law, particularly at master's level. We studied two tribunals, which was forerunner to the International Court of Justice. One was the International Criminal Tribunal for Rwanda, which charged individuals that were involved in the Rwandan genocide. The other was the International Criminal Tribunal for the former Yugoslavia. And if you look, for example, at the comments by different individuals, for example, at the Rwandan genocide, subject to correction, there was only one comment which referred to, I think, the Tutsis as cockroaches, one comment or two comments at best. In Yugoslavia, you had a couple of comments, but attributable at the end of the day to one or two or three individuals at most, which obviously led then to the idea of statements or expressions of statements conveying genocidal intent. I'm going to come to this, but I just want to point out that in relation to this documentation we've got here, where there's a particular section which deals with a doctrine in international law called dolus specialis. Dolus specialis is the evidence of an individual or a state by virtue of its representatives to convey a specific intent to commit and persist in committing genocidal acts, and thereafter to fail or prevent them. And this needs to be determined whether it is in place or not. Now, if you look at I'm just counting before going into it. There's 1, Prime Minister of Israel; 2, President of Israel; 3, Israeli Minister of Defense; 4, the Israeli Minister for National Security; 5, Israeli Minister of Energy and Infrastructure; 6, the Israeli Minister of Finance; 7, Israeli Minister of Heritage; 8, the Israeli Minister of Agriculture; 9, the Deputy Speaker of the Knesset and member of the Foreign Affairs and Security Committee. These are members at the highest level, 9. Then you've got below them Israeli army officials, advisors, and spokespersons and others engaging with the Israeli troops being deployed. That's 10, the Israeli army coordinator of government activities in the occupied territories. 11, Israeli army reservist major general, former head of the Israeli National Security Council and advisor to the defense minister. 11. 12, the comment made by an individual, Giora Eilan, who is now not actually part of the Knesset, but quite clearly, significantly. 13, the Israeli army reservist motivational speech. 14, the head of the Israeli Army's Air Operations Group. 15, the commander in the 2908 Battalion of the Israeli Army. 16, the Israeli Army colonel, that's a deputy head of the coordinator of government activities in the occupied territories. I even lost count. I don't know, it was 15 or 16 Israeli army soldiers, Israeli citizens. The genocidal rhetoric goes deep, from the highest level to the officials, to the lowest level, to former members of government, deep at every level. Statements of genocidal intent. And I'll as we go through the slides, we'll go through a few of them. I've just extracted a few because there are so many. I haven't had time to do every single comment, but there's so many in relation to that. And these are the particular tribunals that I was discussing with. So these are the essential facts. Number 1, Israel has failed to prevent genocide. 2, the acts include killing them. And 3, repeated statements by Israeli state representatives at the highest level to express genocidal intent. So if you leave aside the statements made by the Israeli state representatives, including the Prime Minister, the President, and the Minister of Defense, to express genocidal, even if you leave that out for the sake of argument, by inference, by the actions that you see on ground, you can still prove genocide and genocidal intent by virtue of inference. Because when someone is convicted of murder, the individual is convicted of murder, that is convicted of murder in most of our courts that we see, doesn't go and pronounce and proclaim, I have committed murder, or I have killed someone, or more often than not, he raises a self-defense. No one, I deal with criminal law every day of my life, every day. I deal with rape, robbery, murder, of the most gruesome types in the rural communities of South Africa, which do not even make any international or national headlines. That's how gruesome you see some of these killings. And in all these killings that you see, a lot of them are tavern killings, a lot of them are in the shebeens, a lot of them are from poor people. None of them make the point that they have the direct intention to kill. It's always self-defense. They made a mistake. They were fighting with someone else. And this is exactly the point that Israel has been making. So the fact that you raise self-defense, the fact that you raise there's a mistake, the fact that you raise human shields, all of that has to be interrogated. But it seems to me that when a state somehow or the other says that, as opposed to an individual, somehow we are allowed to believe a state. This is basically what, in Orwellian or Huxleyan terms, you could call the kind of big brother. Just like I don't want to shut down your channel by talking about COVID, but during COVID, we made a lot of comments about what was happening, and YouTube just simply shut us down because we accepted whatever the state told us. And unfortunately, you see the same thing here with the Israeli state. And by and large, mainstream governments like the United Kingdom and the United States and the so-called mainstream propagandist media, corporate media, has simply channeled that. Although they're becoming more restrained, because I see some form of restraint on the part of BBC. Today I was seeing a news clip from CNN, which would have been unheard of 10 years ago or 20 years ago, where CNN, and you can check this clip, is talking about where they're embedded CNN reporters that were embedded with the Israeli Defense Force. And they are now recollecting that there have been 6 major cemeteries in Gaza that were bulldozed and where the bodies were dug up and left to rot. These reporters are now speaking up. That just check the news article on CNN. See the clip. Israel basically decimates and destroys Palestinian graveyards. These are embedded CNN journalists that are with the Israeli Defense Force. They are now speaking out against what the Israeli Defense Force is doing. They are totally mutilating these dead bodies in their graves. This was also one of the arguments that was raised here, that if your aim is to target Hamas, if your aim is, for example, to just simply go after Hamas, and all the rest is just simply purely collateral damage, as Elon Levy and Mark Regev and the Israeli state wants you to believe, why are you basically decimating graveyards? Are there tunnels under these graveyards? Why are you using white phosphorus, as a lot of these doctors that are basically coming out, like Dr. Mads Gilbert? That's also in this documentation. No response to that. It's quite clear that the UN Special Rapporteur in 2014 with Operation Cast Lead, in 2009, Operation Pillar of Defense, clearly proved the usage of white phosphorus. Why is it that no mention of it is made in the corporate media? It's made mention here. This documentation, it's a legal document. It makes mention of the use of white phosphorus, not in Operation Cast Lead or in Operation Pillar of Defense in 2009 and 2014. Now, in this conflict, using white phosphorus. And I've seen some of the gruesome pictures of white phosphorus. That's why in this presentation, I haven't shown any pictures, because on past presentations that I've done on some of the local channels here, when we've done these PowerPoints and shown these particular images, YouTube has shut us down. They've just shut the particular live stream or the channel. So I'm trying to show restraint. I could show these pictures, but I'm not. And I'm saying that this information is there. This is happening in real time before our eyes. These are some of the stats. At the time of the application, this is about 2 weeks or 2 weeks ago. Now, from listening to Dr. Mustafa Barghouti from the Palestinian National Initiative, he puts a figure at 30,000. Some are saying it's a high figure. Some are saying it's 25,000. Whatever the case is, it's beyond 20,000 at this case. Even Israel, who has attacked the Gaza Ministry of Health, which is an independent body, but they say these are Hamas figures. Hamas is not running now the Gaza Ministry of Health. The Al-Qassam Brigades, which is a militant arm of Hamas, is not basically telling the Gaza Ministry of Health, look, basically, this is a figure you need to put out. They are not telling Medicine Sans Frontier, that's Doctors Without Borders, this is a figure you need to put out. They're not telling the UN agencies, these are the figures you need to put out. But this is a figure that is generally accepted. And even though the propagandists in the Israeli spokespeople are saying that these are Hamas figures, why is the state of Israel in its own news, in its own official statements, confirming that the statement of Palestinians killed are over 20,000, although they're saying 8,000 are Hamas? And how do you make that determination that they're Hamas individuals that have been killed? So they're in fact accepting that. A lot of these news items in the United Kingdom, in Australia, in the US, are stating that these are Hamas figures, but they are putting out these figures themselves as figures that they accept. So at the time of this application, these were the figures in terms of the Palestinians killed. And the figures, I believe, may be higher. They also point out, and this is just a summary, but in this application, they go into detail of all the schools, all the universities, business places, worship of the cemeteries, cultural and archaeological sites, municipal and court buildings totally destroyed, all water, sanitation, electricity networks totally destroyed. So the application that the South African government seeks is the application calling, this is the immediate application, this is the order that it wants, halt all military attacks that constitute or give rise to violations of the Genocide Convention, pending the holding of such hearings, so as to enable any court order the court may make on the request for the indication of provisional measures to have its appropriate effect. To that end, the court should order Israel to cease killing and causing serious mental and bodily harm to Palestinian people in Gaza, to cease the deliberate infliction of conditions of life calculated to bring about their physical destruction as a group, and to prevent and punish direct and public incitement to genocide and rescind related policies and practices, including regarding the restriction on aid and the issue of evacuation directives, because it also deals with the fact that there's no place to go now. Because you remember, first, as I told you 2 weeks ago, and as we all heard, they were told to leave. This was a kind of a humanitarian passage that the people in the north of Gaza had to go. When they went down this humanitarian passage, they were bombed and they were attacked and there were strikes. They were then told to go to Khan Yunis. Khan Yunis was then attacked. They were then told to go to the south. The south was attacked. They are now at the Rafah border. And I just saw last week, Friday, I haven't had the time to see some of the latest reports. I haven't seen Al Jazeera today or yesterday, for that matter. I was caught up with a few things. But I saw on Friday that there were attacks on the Rafah border. So where on earth must these people go to? And this is a question they must ask. If your aim is to, as you say, you are so benevolent and so kind, and you're sending leaflets and making these so-called telephone calls to people, where are you moving? Where are you moving them? This is clearly ethnic cleansing and genocide in real time. And only a fool, that's why it frustrates me. And sometimes I have to switch it off when I listen to some of your reporters in your news channels. And we see all of them. Unfortunately, Gideon Levi made the point that if the Israeli citizens and civilians were to see, because 70% of them support what the Israeli government is doing. 70% of Israelis support the Israeli government, at least on the level of attacking Palestinians. They may have an issue with Netanyahu and local policy issues and so on. And of course, the steps that have taken in terms of getting the hostages back. But they support Israeli military attack against Palestinians. But Gideon Levi, who writes for the Haaretz, made the point that if Israeli civilians and citizens saw only half of what we in South Africa see, and I assume, at least if it's not banned in the United Kingdom, see Al Jazeera, RT Russia Today, or Press TV, or even, for example, on now BBC and Sky News, there would have long been a revolt in their own communities. At least a lot of the people that are there that would have had access to a lot of these particular, because of the gruesome nature, they don't get to see this. And that's a reality that we have on the particular ground. Now, this was one point that Israel, in fact, made, is that South Africa basically, and this was a technical point that they that they brought out is that before South Africa approached the International Court of Justice, they are supposed to send a note verbale, and that's basically a notification that there's a dispute that we are raising with you, and having regard to the Genocide Convention, before you approach the court, you have to basically send a notification in layman's terms to Israel to say, look, this is a situation, there's a dispute. What do you say about this before you approach the ICJ? The Council for Israel raised this point that Israel, South Africa should have basically lodged a dispute and raised this dispute with Israel prior to proceeding to the ICJ. And because it has not done that, therefore, in a manner of speaking, the International Court of Justice has got no kind of jurisdiction to hear this matter at this early stage. It's like, for example, in an agreement between two parties or two brothers or sisters, whatever the case is, there is in that contract an arbitration clause. And before invoking the arbitration clause or the mediation clause, whereby the agreement allows for either mediation or an independent arbitrator, you go straight to court. That's basically what Israel is saying. Why didn't you do this before you go there? This is what their argument was, and a lot of their argument rests on that. Now, South Africa never had, and I don't know why, they never rebutted this or never presented a rebuttal to the argument, but in their document, which Israel would have had access to, they deal with this in detail. They mention this, that on the 30th of October, the South African, that's DIRCO, South African Department of International Relations, issued a statement on the international community to hold Israel accountable for international law. Naledi Pandor, that's our Minister of International Relations and Cooperation, addressed the United Nations Security Council on the 24th of October, reminding the international community not to stand idle whilst another genocide was unfolding. Israel never responded. On the 7th of November, South Africa's International Relations Minister warned about the crimes of genocide and that this could not happen. Again, there was no response. On the 10th of November, the Director General of DIRCO, that's the South African Department of International Relations and Cooperation, they conducted a formal diplomatic démarche of the ambassador of the State of Israel, advising him that while South Africa condemned the attacks on the civilians by Hamas, the response was by Israel was unlawful. South Africa wants the ICJ to investigate the leadership of Israel for the crimes on genocide. Nothing, no response. On the 13th of November, there was a meeting with the South African Jewish Board of Deputies. Now, this is a Jewish board that genocide is being inflicted and through collective punishment and ongoing bombardment. Can the Jewish Board of Deputies not do and approaches the Israeli government and express this particular concern? Nothing was done. 17th of November, during the state visit of Qatar, the president of South Africa announced that South Africa was referring the situation instead of Palestine to the International Criminal Court, that's back then, and showing some form of abhorrence. Later, on the 17th of November, the embassy of South Africa in The Hague, together with a number of parties, requested the prosecutor vigorously investigate crimes within the jurisdictional scope of the court in accordance with the Rome Statute. Nothing was done. There were communications and communicados on the 21st of November and, of course, on the 12th of December. And as at the 21st of December, 2023, in accordance with the slide, Israel has not responded to South Africa's note verbale, and but Israel has publicly rejected any suggestion that it has violated its international law in its military campaign in Gaza, and it just simply took a dismissal approach that the allegations by South Africa are outrageous and false, and the assertion that Israel's military attacks on Gaza meet the legal definition of genocide and are aimed at not just simply the killing of innocent people has been fulfilled. Israel denies it. It rejects the claims and the allegations of the South African government. And basically, Israel's own conduct therefore serves to underline the parties' disagreement. So there is clearly a disagreement. There's a number of communications, and Israel has communicated a disagreement. So there's plainly a dispute between Israel and South Africa relating to the application of the Genocide Convention, more particularly that South Africa has, in fact, pursuant to the articles of 36.1 and of the court statutes and Article 9 of the Genocide Convention, the court has jurisdiction to hear this particular dispute by virtue of the fact that there's clearly a dispute now. Israel has taken a position that they've dismissed everything South Africa has stated. All the proclamations made by South Africa at a number of international forums have just simply been ignored. What does South Africa do in a situation? Is there like a magic wand to say, look, let's come to the party, let's have a cup of coffee, let's talk about this. How long do you want to talk for? Maybe a couple of weeks, more months, more people getting killed, maybe 2 months, 3 months. How long do you want to talk? The situation on the ground is so urgent, so you want to have a tea party about it. That's basically what Israel is essentially saying. And the reality of the case is that we've established jurisdiction at the outset of this matter. So South Africa and the legal team went on the attack and stated at the outset that the dispute clearly exists, and Israel is taking a totally dismissive approach to whatever South Africa is saying in relation to that, just simply dismissing everything outrageous, false. South Africa is talking nonsense, flimsy. What are you talking about? There's clearly a dispute there. So the dispute between Israel and South Africa is whether Israel is in fact committing genocide. And so there was full grounds of having this matter taken to the ICJ. And so these are the facts in terms of the introduction. I'm not going to go through a lot, but this is directly from our documentation. By October 2023, 29th of October, the estimation on the ground was that 6,000 bombs per week had been dropped on the tiny enclave. Now, I don't know how it is in terms of length, but the Gaza Strip is subject to correction about 60 kilometers long and about, I think, subject to correction, 20 square kilometers wide, but a very narrow space. So if you're sitting in London, I don't know how much 60 kilometers long is from you. How far can you go 60 kilometers? In South Africa, I know if I travel 60 kilometers from where I'm sitting, I will still be in the south coast of KwaZulu-Natal, meaning I haven't yet entered Durban. 60 kilometers is not far. It takes, at a good speed, I can reach there in about half an hour. So it's not far from one end to the other. It's a small space. So in just over 2 months, the report is, and this is documented in the document, they've wreaked more destruction than the razing of Syria's Aleppo between 2012 and 2016, Ukraine's Mariupol, or proportionately the Allied bombing of Germany in the Second World War, which would mean the bombing of Dresden and the other bombings that took place, I think in 1945, 1944, around about that particular time period. So that's a gravity. Germany is a massive country, but Gaza is a small little strip with a population in excess of 2 million. So do the maths and the calculation. These were the figures that were given between September, because South Africa doesn't just go into what goes on now, but it documents from September 2000 right up until particularly now, that in terms of deliberate targeting, up until the 7th of October, there were 7,569 Palestinians that were basically killed. And they go into a discussion of the Great March of Return. This was a Great March of Return. A lot of people never knew about this Great March of Return. What the Great March of Return was, and there's an entire section about the Great March of Return. I just want to get to this particular portion of the document, whereby, and this is one particular example, is that I think in about 2019, and I don't know if this was covered on the mainstream web, but certainly we never saw it. We read about it in some of the papers. There were a large-scale peaceful protests along the separation borders, and they call the separation fence, but apartheid wall between Gaza and Israel, in which thousands of Palestinians participated every Friday for over 18 months, demanding that the blockade imposed on Gaza be lifted and the return of Palestinian refugees to their home and villages in Israel. On one day alone, Israel killed 60 Palestinians. And these are the Palestinian protesters. None of them are armed. This was like a peaceful demonstration, a peaceful mass. You can see the press. You can see medics. You can see disabled people. And they cite this documentation that I've got here, cites an independent commission of inquiry that was conducted. And basically, there was the Human Rights Council report of the detailed findings of the Independent International Commission of Inquiry on the protests in the occupied Palestinian territory. That's an entire footnote. That is a footnote on its own, footnote 105. And then, of course, they unpack what happened there. During those weekly demonstrations, the Israeli security forces killed and gravely injured civilians who were neither participating directly in hostilities nor posing an imminent threat to life. Amongst those shot were children, paramedics, journalists, and persons with disabilities. Those killed by Israeli soldiers firing from behind included 3 medics and 2 journalists. A total of 36,100 Palestinians, including nearly 8,800 children, 108 were injured by Israel, including 4,903 people who were shot in the lower limbs. 156 of them had to have at least one limb amputated. Over 1,200 required specialized limb reconstruction treatment. The commission found that the maiming was not accidental. The rules of engagement adopted by Israeli permitted snipers to shoot at the legs of the major inciters. One Israeli soldier admitted that he shot 42 knees in one day. And again, that is documented by here. Here's the footnotes documenting that. It's not news reports. The commission believed and found that there were reasonable grounds to believe that Israeli snipers intentionally shot children, knowing them to be children, and they also intentionally shot health workers and journalists, despite seeing that they were clearly marked as such. And not only that, even shooting press. Can you see the press there? There's press in the picture, in the imagery. There's press, that's I can see. I haven't taken some of the other pictures, and I haven't posted some of the gruesome pictures of that particular shooting in case YouTube shuts down this particular podcast. But they were clearly marked. They had flags. This was like a kind of a peaceful demonstration of civil disobedience, like a kind of a Gandhian form of passive resistance, if you were to call it that. And what was the outcome? Shooting, killing, murder. The commission found there were reasonable grounds to believe that Israeli snipers intentionally shot children, knowing them to be children, and they intentionally shot health workers, seeing they were marked. Further reasonably grounds to believe that Israeli snipers shot disabled demonstrators. So if this character, Joseph, that wants to debate us, what's his response on the International March of Return, the Great March of Return? What does he say about that? Was it Hamas? Was that Hamas coming to the borders protesting? Despite seeing that they had visible disabilities and despite them not presenting an imminent threat. Again, this is not a newspaper report from Reuters or Associated Press. This is documented by the inquiry, which is forming part and parcel of the legal document that was presented at The Hague by the International Court of Justice. Then also further, the South African government goes into the report of the United Nations fact-finding mission on the Gaza conflict in January 2009. And here the article was on human shields. And this is what the report discusses on the aspect of human shields. They state that the mission did not find any evidence to support the allegations that hospital facilities were used by the Gaza authorities or by the Palestinian armed groups to shield military activities, or that ambulances were used to transport combatants or for other military purposes. On the basis of its own investigation, statement of the United Nations officials, the mission excludes that Palestinian armed groups engage in combat activities from United Nations facilities that were used as shelters during the military operations. But that is exactly the argument that these swines are using against the Gazans today in this conflict. So why are they killing UN officials and UN facilities and UN schools and hospitals? Because they are basically being used as human shields. And what's the basis for that? Well, they've done it in the past. They've done it in Operation Cast Lead. They've done it in Operation Pillar of Defense. But when you look at the actual fact-finding mission conducted by the United Nations, there was no evidence to support that. This was a fact-finding, and again, it is deeply footnoted. And the footnote for this, if you click on the footnote, that in itself opens up 100-page documentation. I mean, the footnotes themselves open up thousands of pages of documentation. So it's solid material that we are relying on. But what the mission did do, the same mission, 2009, they investigated 4 incidents in which Israeli armed forces coerced Palestinian civilian men at gunpoint to take part in house searches during the military operations, meaning they pointed them at gun, these Palestinians, and they're taking them now in the front. You've got a gun and you're commanding him to go to a house during a military operation. What is that? What on earth is that? The mission concludes that this practice amounts to the use of Palestinian civilians as human shields and is therefore prohibited by international humanitarian law. But who was using the Palestinians as human shields? Who? I want to ask the Zionists who may be listening, or the Christians out there, who was using the Palestinian civilians as human shields? Who? The IDF. The Palestinian men used as human shields were questioned under threat of death or injury to extract information about Hamas, Palestinian combatants, and tunnels. This constitutes a further violation of international humanitarian law. So it's the irony of the irony, as what's the lady's name, formerly from RT, that Israel is the only nation state, or Bassam Youssef states that Israel is like an abusive spouse, a psychopathic and narcissistic abusive spouse. It F's up its spouse at every, your wife at every particular interval, yet it again claims to be the victim. It's like a rapist or a rapist basically claiming that no, the rape victim was harming him. How can you blame us? Look at what the rape victim did. This is basically what Israel is. Israel acts like a rapist. Israel acts like an abusive spouse. And the irony of the situation is that it inevitably always plays the victim. So in actual fact, it accuses Hamas of using Palestinians as human shields when Israel uses Palestinians as human shields. It accuses Hamas of engaging in war crimes when Israel is engaging in war crimes. It accuses Hamas of having no care for Palestinian civilians and putting them out in the front of conflict and claiming that they are killed in the crossfire when Israel was doing the very same thing during its military operations in 2009, in 2012, in 2014. And all of that is documented. So this, I don't have time to go because we're limited. This is in 2009. This document which I have here, which you brothers will be able to read, and the viewers and listeners, I urge you to print it out, study it. If you go to Speaker's Corner, I wish I was there one day with some of you, read it out in Speaker's Corner. Let these thugs and the Zionist propagandists confront them with the material, use this as your weapon, and expose the kind of falsehood that you see out there. It goes into different discussions, this particular document. It went on to say this particular situation, in addition to arbitrary deprivation of liberty and violation of due process, the cases of the detained Palestinian civilians, this was in the past, highlight a common thread of the interaction between Israeli soldiers and Palestinian civilians, which also emerged clearly in many cases. Continuous and systematic abuse, outrages on personal dignity, humiliating and degrading treatment contrary to fundamental principles of international humanitarian law and human rights law. The mission concludes that this treatment constitutes the infliction of a collective penalty on these civilians and amounts to measures of intimidation and terror. By who? It's speaking about the state of Israel. So this is not a Muslim YouTube channel. This is not Press TV. This is not Al Jazeera. This is not basically some of these biased so-called Muslim YouTube channels. This is an independent body that basically described Israel as a terrorist entity, as a terrorist outfit, something which Piers Morgan and some of these other characters refuse. Is Hamas, do you condemn Hamas for terrorism? Well, way back in 2009, Israel was described as a terrorist state by this UN body, by the Human Rights Council, by the UN report of the detailed findings of the Independent International Commission of Inquiry on the protests in the occupied Palestinian territories, which includes Gaza. Gaza is still occupied territory. And in conclusion on that point, we'll try and skip. In assessing the Israeli strikes against the Legislative Council, the mission first of all notes that Hamas is an organization with a distinct political, military, and social welfare component. So in 2009, the mission rejects the analysis of present and former senior Israeli officials that because of the alleged nature of the Hamas government in Gaza, the distinction between civilian and military parts of the government infrastructure is no longer relevant in relation to Israel's conflict with Hamas. You see, because that's the argument being made, that they're targeting Hamas. Back in 2009, in 2012, in 2014, that distinction that you claim is no longer relevant is totally rubbished by this report, by this particular commission. And there were separate commissions of inquiries that viewed. The mission is of the view that this is a dangerous argument that should be vigorously rejected as incompatible with the cardinal principles of distinction. International humanitarian law prohibits attacks against targets that do not make an effective contribution to military action. Attacks that are not directed against military or dual-use objectives are violations of the laws of war, no matter how promising the attacker considers them from a strategic or political point of view. So you believe there are tunnels under hospitals, you believe there are rockets, although in the Al-Shifa hospital and all these other hospitals, we saw nothing of the military command centers that they claimed Hamas had. None of that was seen. Yet, even if it was there, even if there was a dual role, this still violates the laws of war. You cannot say, even if there's one Hamas member, and this is not even the argument being made, that we are always on the back foot, even for the sake of argument, there's one Hamas member. Israel's got no right to bomb a single refugee camp. So you find, for example, in the Jabalia refugee camp, they claimed at the end there was one Hamas commander. So they blew up the entire camp. So they killed about 50 to 100 people, one strike, 100 people to get one Hamas commander. Was that a mistake? Was that collateral damage? Well, they're going to argue collateral damage. They're going to argue that it's a mistake maybe to kill the civilians. They were not the target. But then what about Christmas Eve? Because on Christmas Eve, they made the argument that one of the attacks, and I think I played that we discussed it in the last discussion, one of the refugee camps that was attacked was a mistake. And when questioned and pressed further, why it was a mistake, they said, well, we thought there were Hamas members there, but there were no Hamas members. So it was a mistake, and these mistakes are made in war. So if that was a mistake, then are all the other 24,000 killings where you targeted Hamas allegedly, were they not mistakes? And if they were not mistakes, are you saying that they were deliberate targets? But can you see how circular this whole argument is and how this whole reasoning is? In fact, even as I mentioned, the principle dolus eventualis in murder, if, for example, your intended aim is to go after somebody, and in the process of going after somebody, you are going to kill someone, and you know full well that your intention of going after somebody is going to result in you getting somebody else and killing somebody else, and you proceed nonetheless, that is viewed as intention. That intention is viewed as dolus eventualis. And in terms of criminal law, you can be convicted of murder. So if you apply that argument tenfold, not from the individualistic level, but tenfold in relation to Israel, what does that make Israel? A mass murder of 25,000 people, civilians, men, women, children, babies. Okay? Maybe you accidentally attack them. What about the usage of white phosphorus? What's your argument there? You want to burn Hamas. But if you want to burn Hamas, do you want to also burn babies in the process? Because I've seen pictures of babies, images of babies' skins burnt off like a horror movie. What about death squads at the Abu Ghazala school where there are open death squads where people are being shot dead? There was a report 2 days ago. Check it up. If the brothers have access to just type in Google, Israeli death squads, Al Jazeera, shooting people dead. This was on Friday. Bullet wounds, so they were shot dead. They were not burnt, accidental strikes. The men were taken out from these flats where they were sitting as refugees. They were kept aside from the women, and they were shot dead in front of their wives and children, shot dead, point blank, and their bodies were left there. This is not what Hamas did. This is what Israel did, the Israeli Defense Force. Nobody's talking about this. Why? Why is it that the journalists on Sky News are so restrained, so respectful, so politeful when they're speaking? Why is this never raised? And this is another example which I mentioned. This is also in our documentation. Taking into account, this is a direct quote, the weapons used, and in particular the use of white phosphorus in and around a hospital that the Israeli armed forces knew was not only dealing with the scores of injured and wounded, but also giving shelter to several hundred civilians. The mission finds directly, based on all the information, that in directly striking the hospital and the ambulance depot, the Israeli armed forces in these circumstances violated Article 18 of the Fourth Geneva Convention and violated customary international law in relation to proportionality. This was in 2009. 2009, where about, I think, 2,000, only 2,000, we're saying only 2,000 is bad enough, were killed. 2009. Imagine what the situation is in 2023. So this is the introductory element of the application in terms, and that's why I'm saying it's a meticulously prepared, thought out document. I'm not even doing any justice to it because I'm leaving out so much more, and I'm just simply taking some of the cursory issues out there. And in conclusion on the on that, the Gaza military operatives, according to the Israeli government, thoroughly and extensively planned. While the Israeli government has sought to portray its operation as essentially a response to the rocket attacks in the exercise of its right to self-defense, the mission considers the plan to have been directed, at least in part, at a different target, the people of Gaza as a whole. It is in these circumstances that the mission concludes that what occurred in just over 3 weeks at the end of 2008 and the beginning of 2009 was a deliberate, disproportionate attack designed to punish, humiliate, and terrorize a civilian population, radically diminish its local economic capacity, both to work and to provide for itself, and to force upon it an ever-increasing sense of dependency and vulnerability. You can't make this up. You cannot make this up. Then there was a further report in 2015. I haven't gone into detail with that. A large number of targeted attacks against residential buildings. Military tactics at the bottom of the paragraph reflected a broader policy approved at least tacitly by decision makers at the highest levels of the government of Israel. Destruction of artillery fire, airstrikes, bulldozers may have adopted as a tactic of war. The concentration of destruction in localities close to the Green Line in some areas amounting to 100%, and the systematic way in which these areas were flattened one after the other, however, raised concern that such extent of destruction was not required by a military imperative necessity. If confirmed, this would constitute a grave breach of Article 147 of the Fourth Geneva Convention, which is a war crime. So this is the point, that there is a precedent laid down by the South African government in terms of what had happened. Look at the last paragraph. In the 2 months since 7th of October, the number of journalists killed already, just journalists, people reporting on the war, exceeded that of the entirety of World War II. Now, think about it. Why would you target journalists? Were they collateral damage and they're not properly marked? Do you know you're going to kill them? What is the aim? What is a bigger aim in relation to that? This gets depressing over a particular period of time. And so these are the facts that the United Nations chiefs, the International Committee of Red Cross stated, called Gaza a crisis of humanity, a crisis of humanity. At this particular point in time, and these are some of the facts, Israel is said to be dropping dumb bombs. These are unguided bombs. And they have a lethal radius of up to 360 meters. That's a wide radius, 900 kilogram bombs. This weaponry that is being deployed in one of the most densely populated areas in the world, where approximately 1 in every 100 people have been killed. These are, again, some of the figures and facts that you have here in terms of the number of families. There's an acronym called Wounded Child, No Surviving Family. Numerous Palestinian families have lost generations, 70 members. I mean, imagine you losing 70 members of your family. I can't even count 70 members of my family. I can't even count. And I've got some family in Bradford. I've got some family in the UK. I've never met them, but I can't even count them. I can't even count 70 members, immediate family members. I can't. Imagine this situation here. So this is a situation: 311 doctors, 103 journalists, 40 civil defense workers, 44 United Nations employees have been killed, the highest number of aid workers killed in UN history in such a short time. So when people talk about what's happening in Syria, what's happening in Yemen, and of course Sudan and some of these other areas, which is the refrain and the retort by those who want to move you away from Gaza. Certainly these are bad conflicts, and these are something that we need to be speaking out against, and of course showing a great degree of concern. For example, the Uyghurs in China, which we are speaking about. But nothing is coming close to what we are seeing here on this scale. Nothing, according to the international reports and independent commissions on the ground. Nothing coming close to this. Presently, in fact, I should correct this. It's not maximum level, minimum level. There's only one hospital right now functioning at minimum level. Minimum level. The reports right now, white phosphorus is being used in deeply populated areas. The World Health Organization, even small amounts of white phosphorus can cause deep and severe burns, penetrating even through the bone and capable of reigniting after initial treatment. Again, no functioning hospitals in Gaza. People are waiting to die. Israel has destroyed. So, I mean, let's look at some of these facts. There's not a single school left in Gaza. Not a single school. There's no educational institute left in Gaza. There's one hospital barely functioning. All heritage sites have been destroyed. All heritage sites. I mean, you look at, for example, besides the refugee camps, the schools, the historic street, the Ibn Uthman Mosque, there are, for example, Israel has left the Gaza City's main public libraries in ruins. You look at, for example, leading Palestinian academics, the president of the Islamic University, Professor Sufyan Tai, dead. The award-winning physicist and UNESCO chairman of astronomy, astrophysics, and space sciences in Palestine, dead, killed with his family. Dr. Ahmed Hamdi Abu Absa, dean of the software engineering department of the University of Palestine, dead, reportedly shot dead by Israeli soldiers as he walked away, having been released from 3 days of enforced disappearance. Professor Muhammad Eid Shabir, professor of immunology and virology and former president of the Islamic University of Gaza, shot dead. Professor Rifat Al-Arir, poet and professor of comparative literature and creative writing at the Islamic University of Gaza, killed, both shot dead and murdered, both killed with their families and members of their families and killed by Israel. Al-Arir was a co-founder of We Are Not Numbers. And that's interesting because I think there was a Palestinian youth project which was used to tell stories, and there was a very telling tale by a boy, I think that was part of this particular project, which did a poetry, We Are Not Numbers, and he was caught reporting that poetry on Al Jazeera, and then within 2 days he was dead. It's like, if you were to write a fictional narrative, Marwan Bishara, who's a regular interviewer on Al Jazeera, made the point that if you were to write a book and send it to one of these major publishing houses like Penguin or Pelican or Pluto Press or whatever the case, some of these major publishing houses, and you're saying you're going to write a report, a fictional narrative about war, but in one war there is a story of an academic, and he is killed, and then his father is killed, and then his mother is killed, and then his brother is killed, and his entire family is killed, and then the organization and the individuals who write the stories and the narratives, they are also killed. You couldn't even make that up in fiction. That's how bizarre and obscene and outrageous and inhumane and disgusting and pathetic and cruel and satanic that you see these actions before our eyes. Israel is the children of Israel. I mean, the Quran speaks about the children of Israel, and there's many passages and references to the children of Israel. Ya Bani Israel, iskuru ni'mati allati an'amtu alaykum, or call to mind the special favor which I bestowed upon you. And Israelis want to see themselves and describe themselves as a chosen people. Israelis want to view themselves as the chosen people, and the Israeli government, Israeli regime want to view themselves as the chosen people. And I would say they are the chosen people, but they are the chosen people of Satan. These are the chosen people of Satan. So if Brother Joseph is listening, and he's a pro-hardcore Zionist, a self-appointed one at that, then he's a chosen individual of the Satan, a satanic person, not chosen by God, but chosen by the devil, because you are basically supporting the devil, supporting. That's why Jesus himself says in the New Testament, what does he say about these so-called children? He says, you are the children of the devil. And this can be seen in real time, that these are children of Satan engage in satanic acts. And I'm not even saying that as I'm biased, certainly, but even if someone like Norman Finkelstein, who is not by any means religious, secular, describes them as satanic. Professor Rashid Khalidi is also secular, not religious in the absolute sense, but secular, describes them as satanic. Then you could quite clearly see how far away Israeli regime, the Israeli people who support them, and Jews in general who are Zionists have gone and veered far from the truth. And I'm not only saying that, your own Jews are saying that. I mean, I had Rabbi Yisrael David Weiss, and maybe you can, brothers, Muhammad can have him. I'll try and put him in touch with you. You could have a podcast session with him. He made the point that Israel is satanic. He made the point that this is a satanic regime. It's evil. It's not something that he supports, not something any ultra-Orthodox true Jew would in fact support. Got an interesting book here, which I picked up. A brother of mine, he passed away, and well, when I call him brother, a friend of mine, A History of Jewish Crimes by Shakil Ahmed Zia, printed by the Thinkers Library, documenting all the Israeli atrocities committed from 1948 now, every single massacre, and of course even before the advent of the Second World War and the creation of Israel. So you can go on and on in terms of that. I'm going to try and wrap up this presentation. All of this is there. Israel has damaged and destroyed an estimated 318 Muslim Christian religious sites. They've damaged the Church of St. Porphyrius, founded in 425. Targeted and killed church compounds. You know, there were those two women that had come out of the church. What was the excuse for killing them? They were looking for water. The one lady went out. She was shot dead. Then the other lady inside the church went out. She was shot dead. What's the excuse there? Was the church a Hamas facility? Israel is killing scientists, storytellers, and poets. Pastry chef, you know, you had like, what's the pastry chefs, local legends, the equivalents of, what's this guy, Jamie Oliver, and some of these chefs in like the Cake Boss and so on. These are the equivalent. They were killed by an Israeli airstrike on the house, and the shop's motto, on the motto of the shops, it was in plain Hebrew and Arabic, let the poor eat. It's got a reputation for giving away the popular Palestinian treat knafe to indigent customers. 84-year-old Elham Farah from one of the Palestine's Christian families, a reputed accordionist and music teacher known as Mother Orange to generations of Palestinian music students for her shock of red hair. She was a musician. She was a Christian from one of Palestine's oldest Christian families, shot dead by an Israeli sniper outside the Holy Family Church in Gaza City. These are the stories that need to be told, because why I say it's important to tell this, because when some of our Muslim individuals speak and they're called to these programs, they speak in abstract terms. They speak in abstract terms in the sense of facts, statistics, and figures, and then make analogies with definitions of terrorism and get involved in unnecessary argumentation. But it's important that when you want to create and portray the brutality, the insanity, the Satanism of the Israeli regime, that you have to personalize some of these narratives. And that's why the Israelis are such masters in propagandist art and propagandist negativity. Stereotype. When you listen to Mark Regler and when you listen to Elon Levi, what do they mention? They fabricate stories, but they fabricate stories of necrophilia. Necrophilia. Do you know what necrophilia is? Necrophilia is when you have sex with dead bodies. So they claim Hamas had sex with dead bodies. They claim that, which is false. It's a lie. It's a lie from the pits of hell where they come from. They claim that Hamas raped little children in front of their parents, and they shot the parents and they shot the children dead. They claim that Hamas cut off the breasts of women and they threw it around. So they paint these horrific pictures. But the argument and the reason why they do that is to create this monstrosity so they can justify these particular acts. And they create this, and they do this with devastation on their corporate media cartels, which promote the ideas, which then lays the foundation for genocide. When we talk about 24,000 people dead or 10,000 children dead, it doesn't play a role in the minds of a lot of people because, number one, we are cut for time. And number two, we don't have the opportunity to tell these stories that each and every single person that was killed had individual stories that he was told that he died. When you kill scientists, when you kill storytellers, when you kill the press, when you kill old ladies, deliberately targeting them, when you take men in front of their family and shoot them dead, and we're seeing this eyewitness in real time, and you see the bullet wounds, unlike what the Israelis claimed about Hamas. These are stories that need to be told, and people need to see this. And so that's why it's important we don't lose by default. And so this application here goes, it personalizes the story. So once again, I urge the brothers, when this podcast is over, I will get, I believe I may have sent Brother Muhammad the application itself. I urge Brother Muhammad to put it up on your YouTube page as a PDF, as a document, which people can then download and study, circulate, and share. Because a lot of your reporters and journalists in the mainstream media, and I was surprised, they haven't seen this application. They're only familiar with the presentations, but they haven't actually seen this 84-page document, which I want you all to share and circulate and use it to expose and send it to your local radio stations and your local press. Make copies, send it out in Speaker's Corner at Hyde Park. Circulate this document so people can know about the information that is contained in relation there. Last point I want to point about one of the categories of genocide, the measures intended to prevent Palestinian births, besides shooting pregnant women being killed by Israeli soldiers whilst they're trying to get access to health care. Newborn babies are particularly impacted by displacement, lack of access to food, water. Okay. All right, boy. Water, shelter, clothes, hygiene, sanitation, and lack of access to health services. Estimated 5,500 of approximately 52,000 pregnant Palestinian women in Gaza giving birth each month are doing so in unsafe conditions, often with no clean water, much less medical assistance, in shelters, in homes, in the streets, where they are able to get to a functioning hospital. Pregnant women are having to undergo cesarean sections without anesthetic. You know how hard and difficult pregnancy is? My wife has, lucky enough, but she was in pain when you go under labor. It's a painful process. Imagine going under cesarean section without anesthetic, where you cut the woman's womb without anesthetic. I saw this in a movie, I think a TV program. There's a TV program, I've seen one or two of it, which I don't encourage anybody to see, and I'm not promoting it. But there's a program or a series called The Walking Dead. I think The Walking Dead or Fear the Walking Dead, where it's like a kind of a zombie apocalypse in this dark wasteland. And you see an actual image where the woman's got no anesthetic, and she has to give birth, one of the characters there. And you see them cutting up the woman's stomach and taking the baby out. And the woman dies. Because if you have so much of that pain, your body goes into shock, you get a heart attack, you die. This is like The Walking Dead, as worse than The Walking Dead. Because there in The Walking Dead, in the series, this TV program, the houses are not leveled. You've got a zombie apocalypse, but the dead basically arise and are eating people up and attacking people, and they're survivors. But there's still infrastructure that's in place. There's still infrastructure. There's buildings. There's nothing in Gaza. Totally nothing in Gaza. And so this is the reality. I mean, there's the Minister of Health confirms that the only option facing Palestinian women in Gaza who bleed out after giving birth is to undergo an immediate hysterectomy without anesthetic for their lives to be saved. Premature births have increased tenfold. on 7th of October. And so this is the reality of what we have now. When we convey genocidal intent, and I'm almost done with my slides, I want to point out some of the pointers that the advocate Nguka Toby, who was one of our lead counsel, made mention of when he pointed out genocidal intent. Because in this report, unlike a lot of the reports that are on TV, a lot of the memes that are basically put out there, when they are conveying genocidal intent, when people quote these Israeli ministers that are conveying genocidal intent to different people at different intervals, the general argument is that we're quoting them out of context. You know, that's a point, that this is quoted out of context. What exactly did this particular person say? Maybe he didn't mean that. Maybe Netanyahu, when he's talking about Amalek, he's not actually meaning Amalek. He's talking about the Hamas. They're talking about the individuals within Hamas, in relation to Hamas. It's got nothing to do with the Palestinian people. Well, what this report does, and you'll read the report, they go into the entire detail. I've just summarized it here, but they give the entire quote. Then they give the reference to the footnote, which points you to the actual report from Haaretz, the Times of Jerusalem, and the Hebrew dailies, together where necessary, the total video clip in Hebrew where these particular comments were made. So, for example, on the 7th of October, in a televised address by the government, Netanyahu promised to operate forcefully everywhere. There's a footnote for it, 439. The entire speech is there. 13th of October, he confirmed that we are striking our enemies with unprecedented might. Again, another footnote. The ... is my summation of what I've taken from the particular application. 15th of October, when Israeli airstrikes had already killed 2,670, including 754 children, Prime Minister stated that Israeli soldiers understand the scope of the mission and stand ready to defeat the bloodthirsty monsters who have risen against Israel to destroy us, having killed all these people. 16th of October, in the Knesset, speaks about the struggle between light and darkness, good and evil. Then, on the 28th of October, he invokes Amalek. You must remember what Amalek did. And at that stage, when he's talking about Amalek, there were more than, I think, 10,000 Palestinians that were basically killed. So the relevant biblical passage reads as follows. It's, you know, and again, a lot of these people misquote it and don't know where it is, because when questioned, people think it's from Exodus or it's from the book of Joshua. No, it's got nothing to do with that. It's from the book of Samuel, 1 Samuel chapter 15, verse 3. And Amalek was amongst a group that had waylaid and had prevented the pass of Moses some 400 years before. So in relation to that incident, the satanic Yahweh basically tells Saul that you go and basically kill everybody. Men, women, children, oxen, suckling, camels, donkeys, all of that. Eventually, he doesn't. He keeps the best stock for himself, like the best of the oxen and the sheep, but the infants kills all of them. But one of the rulers, the king Agag, he doesn't kill. So what then happens is that Samuel, who is a prophet, he's an inspired, and what he does is that eventually, we read further down the line, he goes to Agag. I don't have the Bible in front of me, and he hacks him up to pieces, chops him up. Imagine hacking someone up like an American Psycho, or like in the horror movies. You chop them up to pieces, Agag, and then eventually God is pleased with these particular actions. So he's citing this, and if it's not in reference to if it's not in reference to Palestinian civilians, how can you apply this to Hamas? Because it tells you kill men, women, infants, sucklings, donkeys, sheep, camels, and asses. And you juxtapose that with what's happening on the ground, where men, women, donkeys, children, babies, sucklings are actually being killed. How can you not see the two going side by side? So it's quite clear that there's no justification for this. This was one of the pointers that Advocate Nguka Toby raised in relation to the aspect of genocidal intent. After showing this, and I urge you to go back to his presentation, Advocate Nguka Toby, one of our senior counsel, not too far from where I stay, he comes from the Eastern Cape, a poor area in South Africa, has done pretty well for himself. I think he's based in the Gauteng area now. He's quite quite a lot of experience with the Judicial Service Commission. But after having played this in the comments by Netanyahu, he then plays a clip of Israeli soldiers who are singing and glorifying Amalek after they had just engaged in a strike of a refugee camp, killing people, dancing and singing. And that video is played live on television before the judges at the International Court of Justice. When the spokesperson for Israel was asked about this on Channel 4, when he was pressed further, and I must say the questions were mild, he says he never saw that. He was on a plane flight. It was a flight from Israel to his illegitimate grandfather, the United Kingdom. He was there to the UK, so he never saw that. Even though this was widely publicized, the Israeli spokesperson never saw that, and so he cannot comment on that. President of Israel, he states it's an entire nation. I don't know if you can see the, if I can basically just highlight this, I can't seem to highlight, but the entire nation that's responsible. It's not true, this rhetoric about civilians are not aware, not involved. It's absolutely not true. We will uproot evil so there will be good. The Israeli president, one of those to have handwritten messages on the bombs to be dropped on Gaza. The defense minister, Yoav Gallant, stated there shall be no electricity, no fuel. We are fighting human animals, and we will be acting accordingly. Gaza won't return to what it is. We will eliminate everything. If it doesn't take one day, it'll take a week. It'll take a week. We will reach all places. He further announced that Israel was moving a full-scale response and had removed every restriction on Israeli forces. If this is not an intent to commit genocide, then what is? You've got the Israeli Minister for National Security, Itamar Ben-Gvir. To be clear, when we say that Hamas should be destroyed, it also means those who celebrate, those who support, and those who hand out candy, they're all terrorists. They should also be destroyed. Why? And then he goes on further. Who voted Hamas in? Check the reports. Go back to the document, read it. So they are also culpable in relation to that. Then you've got the Israeli Minister of Energy and Infrastructure, Israel Katz. All the civilian population in Gaza is occupied to leave immediately. We will win. They will not receive a single drop of water or a single battery until they leave the world. Humanitarian aid to Gaza? That's a question. No electrical switch will be turned on. No water hydrant will be opened. No fuel truck will enter until the Israeli abductees return home. Humanitarianism for humanitarians. And nobody will preach us morality. But now, how do you get the Israeli abductees home when you will be also causing them to suffer? Because you're going to kill them. You'll be bombing them. You could be already at the Jabalia refugee camp. 7 hostages were apparently killed. When you switch off electricity, you switch off water, are they not suffering as well? These same hostages. So how is your aim being achieved? The hostages was not the aim of Israel. This is rubbish. They are not out to gain hostages, because if they were out to gain hostages, they would not be engaging in these bombing campaigns, which would invariably kill them and invariably cause them total destruction in the process. And as we can quite clearly see, when those 3 men, they took off their shirts, they were in their underwear, they had no bomb strapped to them, they spoke in Hebrew, they came with a white flag. They asked us, help us, help us. What happened to them? They were shot dead. Now, when you ask them, they say it's a mistake. We're investigating that. What was a mistake? What was a mistake? I'll tell you what the mistake is. The mistake is that they thought these were Palestinians, if there was a mistake at all, and therefore they killed them. And if they were Palestinians, they would have said, no, these were Hamas terrorists, so we killed them. You couldn't make this up. No one will preach us morality. Well, I agree. No one should preach them morality because they're an immoral nation. They have no morals, no scruples. They're satanic. So how can you preach morality to Satan? Is Satan redeemable? Can you redeem Satan? Shaitan, is he going to go to Jannah in the end? Are you going to redeem him? You can't preach morality to the immoral, to those that are beyond redemption. Bezalel Smotrich, Israeli Minister of Finance, we need to deal a blow that hasn't been seen in 50 years, take down Gaza. Aliyahu, this was a famous one. We must, in the north of this is what he says on Facebook. And you can befriend him on Facebook and engage him. The north of the Gaza Strip, more beautiful than ever. Can you see that? More beautiful than ever. Everything is blown up and flattened. simply a pleasure for the eyes. We must talk about the day after. In my mind, we will hand over lots to all those who fought for Gaza over the years and to those evicted from Gush Katif, a former Israeli settlement in Gaza. So what's he talking about? Re-annexing Gaza, settlements coming back. He later argued against humanitarian aid. We wouldn't hand the Nazis humanitarian aid. There is no such thing as uninvolved civilians in Gaza. He also posited a nuclear attack on the Gaza Strip. Now, what is he talking about? Gazans are Nazis. So therefore, the guilt of Europe is now superimposed on the Gazans and the Palestinians. There's no innocent people. They must be all destroyed. If this is not a claim or a genocidal intent, then what is? Israeli Minister of Agriculture, this is my last slide. On the last 11th of November 2023, Avi Dichter, in a television interview, recalled the Nakba in 1948, in which over 80% Palestinian population of the new Israeli state was forced from their homes, and stated that we are now actually rolling out the Gaza Nakba. This is a Gaza Nakba that we are rolling out. This is the Israeli Ministry of Agriculture. And there's many more. I've just clipped these posts from this year, and there's so many more. Now, if you look at the Rwandan genocide, if you look at the Yugoslavian genocide, where there was clearly genocide that took place, the statements conveying genocidal intent did not come even close to what you see here. I want people who are listening, Christians or Zionists out there, know that that has been communicated in terms of genocidal intent is not even close to what was conveyed during the Rwandan genocide and by a number of the Slav Serb leaders. Not even close to what we are seeing here. Nothing close to. And you could go on, with regards to the former Israeli army reservists. So if you've got a situation where people are being butchered and slaughtered and death squads operating in real time, and there is genocidal intent, how can you argue against the prima facie proof that there's genocide happening in real time before our eyes? You couldn't make this up. And that's why it would be very unsurprising if the interim order is not obtained. In relation to the eventual order or discussion about whether Israel is guilty of genocide or not, from a legal point of view, Israel's got no case. From an international law point of view, South Africa has discharged its onus. It's got a very high onus to meet. It's discharged its onus. Just read this document. And this is just the introductory document. There'll be more details coming out much later as we go through the course and months of the hearing. But they've discharged the onus. In criminal law, the onus of discharge is on the state to ensure that the state has discharged its onus beyond reasonable doubt, in order, for example, to prove or secure the conviction of an accused person who's been accused of rape, robbery, or murder. And the same principle would obviously apply in the case of genocide, where the onus is quite high to show that the state has engaged in genocide. And one of the main elements is indeed genocidal intent. And I believe that South Africa has basically fulfilled its standards. From the international law point of view, we basically had the textbook of international law, Professor John Dugard, who I highly respect, Professor Max Duplessis. They formed the bulwark, at least John Dugard, amongst leading jurists in the world. He's one of the leading jurists in the world. Francis Boyle, who's also another international law expert, has made the point they've clearly established the state. The only issue at the end of the day is that does the ICJ and do the judges at the International Court of Justice have the political will eventually to make a finding that Israel is indeed guilty of genocide? In relation to the interim order, I am hopefully optimistic that we will get the interim order, and I will be surprised if we don't. Pertaining to the eventual secondary process about whether Israel has been guilty of genocide, well, that will be determined in a couple of years' time, and that'll be an entire process that will be looked in. So I never got to complete my slide presentation. Forgive me for that, but I've gone as far as this. But this is I've extracted some of the key paragraphs, terms, phrases, and some of the core issues that were used in this particular document, and I hope it's been of some sort of benefit to the actual listeners out there. So I leave it at that.
That's fantastic, Brother Yusuf Ismail. First of all, that is a very powerful presentation that you gave. SubhanAllah. I'm really shocked by that and kind of lost for words. It's the blood.
You know what, brother Mom, just a quick point.
Go ahead.
There is no, legally speaking, and I saw the Israeli presentation, very poor performance by the State of Israel. I'm surprised they never got, there was some sort of rumor that they were going to get Alan Dershowitz. Alan Dershowitz is retired, Jeffrey Epstein's lawyer, and I would have thought that at the very least Dershowitz would have been included. I was surprised that they never, well, actually, I was not surprised that they did not include him by virtue of the fact that he's already past his prime. There was Malcolm Shaw, who is highly respectable, but in relation to the arguments that he was raising against South Africa, it was purely a technical argument. He raised the issue of jurisdiction. He raised the issue of the fact that Israel, that South Africa never, established a kind of a dispute with the State of Israel. But again, those are technical nuances that are neither here nor there. In terms of the content, in terms of the substance, this is a well thought out document, and I urge the viewers out there to have a look at it and study this completely.
Sure, thank you, Yusuf. Michael has been waiting such a long time. I had a brief chat with him in the private chat, so I don't want to give him, I don't want to be unjust to Michael. Michael, briefly, I just want you to explain what you mentioned in the private chat. I'm going to unmute you now and then go ahead, and then we can have a Q&A, okay?
Sure. How's everybody doing today?
Alhamdulillah, good, thank you. Thanks for joining us. You mentioned something in the private chat.
Well,
can you just emphasize again and repeat what you meant?
Sure. So, for instance, I'm sure you seem old enough to remember Darfur. George W. Bush called it genocide at the time. And I think the European Union and the UN and most of the world community came out and said it was not genocide. So what is your guys' standard for when something rises to genocide? They called them, I guess, the Africanized or Arabized Africans were killing the Black Africans in Somalia, right? In the western side of Somalia in Darfur. And as I remember, they were called like the Janjaweed or something, maybe. Janjaweed, yeah, the militias. Yeah. And, they were stuffing men, women, and children into wells, apparently to poison the water and wiping out entire villages. Also, there was an attack, I don't know, maybe 5 or 6 years ago in Mozambique by Islamists. And I think they beheaded something like 50 people in the day. Also, you mentioned the Rwandan genocide, and as I recall, it was like 800,000 people were killed in 6 months or something, mostly with machetes. The Hutus against the Tutsis. Yeah.
I think just quickly, Article 2 of the convention defines genocide. It's quite clearly the intent to destroy, in whole or in part, a national, ethnic, racial, or religious group based on killing members of the group, causing serious bodily or mental harm to members of the group, and deliberately inflicting on the group conditions of life calculated to bring about its physical destruction in whole or in part. Now, you raised the question of the Janjaweed, and certainly you mentioned the Hutus in Rwanda, and certainly that was clearly a genocide. And of course, you mentioned ISIS in Mozambique. And by the way, I know two of those individuals, they were criminally charged. I know some of the individuals because they are South Africans. A lot of them are from South Africa. There were about 2 or 3, but they were not ISIS per se. They were ISIS wannabes. I think the distinction you have is that they are non-state actors. So the point that South Africa has made in this particular application is that it's bringing as a signatory to the Genocide Convention, and Israel also being a signatory to the Genocide Convention. In fact, the Genocide Convention was created with the crimes of the Second World War at play. So it's bringing the State of Israel as a state actor by virtue of the fact that the actions being committed by the state by means of policy fulfill the definition of genocide, and that's borne out by the Israeli Defense Force and the actions. I think with what was going on in Rwanda, where you had one group that was basically involved in genocide against the other group, the Tutsis, you had a lot of non-state actors at play. So you basically had this kind of invocation by one group against another group. And then you had the communities and people in general running rampant against the other group based on their particular ethnicity. And I think the similar thing was happening with the Janjaweed. The Janjaweed is also a non-state actor. And I think these are crimes that need to be spoken out against. I mean, even right now, the RPF, which is a kind of a recently in Sudan, that has basically is a kind of a the Janjaweed was a forerunner, the predecessor of the RPF, and they were clearly engaging in crimes against the communities. They view one group viewed itself as Arab and the other as non-Arab, but if you look at their complexity and their complexion, they're very much the same. I think what distinguishes the actions of Israel to, for example, from my perspective, at least what happened in Mozambique, is that you've got most of these cases, individuals are non-state actors. So you've got a major state here that, number one, claims to be the only democracy in the Middle East. It makes that claim. Number two, it claims to have high standards in its operational mechanism and its framework. But number three, at the same time, it makes a claim that it's got no moral agency. So whatever it's doing and the killings that it basically is engaging in, or the massacres and the death squads that are played by the IDF, claims that it has no moral agency for this, because these are basically individuals that are caught up as they use or they mention crossfire or human shields. Now, the one point we need to understand that there's no crossfire. All the time when I hear an Israeli spokesperson or a propagandist speak about the deaths and the murder of Palestinians, they also always say, well, this is, there's a lady in the UK, a repugnant lady, just like Piers Morgan, Julia Brewster. She was interviewing Dr. Mustafa Barghouti, shameless interview on one of your channels, I believe Talk TV, which is controlled by Rupert Murdoch. She says, this is a reality of war. We know war is bad, and this is a tragedy, and they getting caught up in the crossfire. There's no crossfire. It's not a question of civilians walking in a pathway and you've got two armed forces coming and shooting each other, and accidentally these people are getting shot. That's absolutely not what is happening. They are targeted areas being decimated, being blown up, people being caught up. Of course, there's some form of guerrilla warfare that is happening now in the north by Hamas fighting or striking back. When Israel attacked, it seemed to me that this was clearly a revenge. And now we are realizing that based on the information that we are getting, that even what happened on October 7th conveys and illustrates that Israel, in fact, invoked the Hannibal Directive, which is something that they claimed that they've used in the past, whereby they initially stated that Hamas had burnt men, women, and children, had raped women, we know that the rapes are now, or the beheaded babies are as a total fabrication. But what we do know is that bodies were burnt. We did see the convoy of vehicles being burnt and houses being burnt. Now we realize that they were Israeli Apache helicopters that had come at a certain point and were basically firing artillery shells and cannon shells and destroying houses and burning people. And this has been confirmed by them in their report. So clearly what Israel has done fulfills the definition of what I believe to be genocide. It's killing members of the group. It's causing serious bodily harm. And why is it using white phosphorus? I mean, if it's just simply accidentally killing people, striking people, and people are dying, well, what's the purpose of using white phosphorus? Why cut off water? Why cut off fuel? Why allow people to leave a hospital and leave babies on the incubators to die of suffocation? I mean, why attack people walking out of churches? Why attack, for example, their own hostages? I mean, there's so many issues that are there. There's so many facts. That's why I'm saying, Brother Michael, that when you do have the time, I'll get this document, or you can send your email and I'll email you a copy of the application. Have a look at it and see that there's basically no justification in terms of what's happening on the ground. And this state has exposed itself. It's going to become a pariah for the rest of the world. And all of this is basically as a result of its actions on the ground, and certainly what happened even before the 7th of October.
Okay. Well, in the comments section before I came backstage, I had mentioned Saddam Hussein, and one of the people said he made some mistakes, but was generally a good force in the Middle East. I was wondering.
No, not at all. Not at all. I mean, I look. Let me just quickly mention Saddam, because I know time and I have to go and pray. But Saddam Hussein, if you remember that he was involved in the Iran-Iraq war between the 1980s after the revolution to right up to 89. And there was one particular crime where he had gassed the Kurds at Halabja. You remember that?
Yeah,
those weapons.
Mosul.
Yeah, those weapons were supplied by the United Kingdom and the United States, and they fully knew that at that stage, and they supported him at that time. It was only after the invasion of Kuwait in 1991, after Gulf War I, and there you had, for the very first time, George Herbert Walker Bush spreading atrocity propaganda, because they had the ambassador's daughter, the Kuwaiti ambassador's daughter, giving a speech before Congress, and you can even check this up on YouTube, stating that Iraqi soldiers had taken babies from the incubators in the Kuwaiti hospitals and had dumped them on and there was a massive outrage. And then, of course, we had Gulf War I, and then, of course, Gulf War II. We know it's a lie, weapons of mass destruction. But
they always go to baby killing. I mean, World War I.
You know why, Michael? You know why, Michael?
It turned
what
out
I call atrocity propaganda. This is the atrocity propaganda that is needed, because once you gain sympathy, then that gives you a leeway to do everything that you want to engage in and create mayhem.
You want to make the enemy worse than you, always.
Yeah, baby killing is the number one thing. Yeah, absolutely.
You had a question, Michael, in the chat regarding some hadith.
Yeah,
you're trying to say that Islam or the Muslims or the Prophet Muhammad kind of like gave the thumbs up to commit genocide. Do you want to relate the hadith, please?
Sure. The hadith in the 19th book of Muslim, when asked about the killing of the women and children of the polytheists during night raids, Muhammad said they are from them. How do you guys interpret that?
If I basically look, and I'm not an expert on hadith, but if I see the commentary by Abdul Hamid Siddiqui and Imam Nawawi, and again, I don't know, I have to look at the background and the authenticity of that specific hadith in question about they're one of them. But what the explainers and those who give the commentaries on that particular hadith give is that there was a report that women and children were killed in the battle. When the Prophet is basically being confronted about this particular killing that apparently took place, which involved some women and some children, he stated that in that particular context, it's a mistake. They were part of them, but it was not a deliberate, intentional killing, because you have to juxtapose that hadith, if it is authentic, with other established hadith that the Prophet Muhammad basically stated that in terms of the rules of war, you are not to target women, you are not to target children, you are not to target birds, you are not to, for example, even disturb the bees in that particular area. In fact, in terms of the Islamic rules of war, the Prophet, peace be upon him, was said to say that even if a person is wounded in attack, in a battle, you are not to attack him. Once a person dies, you are not to mutilate him. He deserves a burial. This means that wounded soldiers who are not fit to fight, or nor actually fighting, are basically individuals that should not be basically targeted. In relation to torture with fire, there's a hadith, for example, where the Prophet stated that a punishment by fire does not behove anyone except the master of the fire. That's in Abu Dawood. And that's the injunction deduced from that, saying that the adversary should not be burnt alive. No prisoner should be put to the sword. So that's a clear, unequivocal instruction given in Bukhari. No one should be tied to be killed. The Prophet has prohibited the killing of anyone who's tied or in custody. There should be no looting or destruction of the enemy's territory. In other words, there should not be a kind of a pillage and plunder. If you look at these battles that were engaged, and I can give you an example quickly on that, you know, when we talk about warfare, we're talking about warfare on a massive scale. If we're talking about a battle in the time of the Prophet, an analogy I could give to you, the size of the battlefield, would possibly be the size of the grass or the pitch on Old Trafford. I don't know if you guys have been to Old Trafford, the Old Trafford Stadium that we are familiar with, or the COP, where Liverpool Football Club. That's probably the size of places and battlegrounds like Badr and Uhud and so on.
Right.
So these were small, concentrated areas where soldiers fought against soldiers. the military fought against the military. It wasn't a case like you see in modern day time where they are destroying homes and hospitals and civilians and killings and so on. In terms of looting, if you look at Abu Dawud and Bukhari, the Prophet instructed Muslims that if they enter the enemy's territory, they shouldn't destroy the residential areas nor touch the property of anyone except those who are fighting with them. In other words, they are to call out the fighting men. They had to call out the fighting men. Do not destroy the villages or the towns. Do not spoil the cultivated fields and gardens, and do not slaughter the cattle. So the booty of war, which is acquired from that battleground, is obviously a different issue from that. That consists of the wealth and the provisions and the equipment captured from the military headquarters of the combatant armies. But in a general sense, there should be no destruction where you decimate an entire population. The sanctity of the dead body. Now, none of that, and so you juxtapose all those statements that are being made by him. You look at the passages in the Quran, and then you contrast that with, for example, that isolated hadith which states about they are from them, which has been explained that in that instance, if there was killing of civilians and children from the enemy combatants, they are from them would obviously infer that they were part of them. What you did was a mistake, but this was basically something which was done in that context of warfare, which was not deliberately done, because otherwise you would have a contradiction, because on the one hand, he clearly gave an instruction. You are not to kill women and children.
The hadith right before it says, do not kill women and children. And then the next one says, when asked about that. It's interesting. You mentioned the Battle of Badr, and you say injured people should not be killed, but I forget his name, Abdullah bin Mas'ud, I think, like he was a dwarf.
Yeah.
After the battle, he asked Muhammad what he could do. He said, because of my stature, I couldn't partake in the battle. And he said, well, go out among, the dead and gather up the war booty, the swords and the armor.
Michael, I would refrain from using the term dwarf because it's like a bit of a disrespect. I'll tell you, he's short in stature.
Okay.
In height, I wouldn't say he's a dwarf. By far, Abdullah bin Mas'ud radiallahu anh was not a dwarf. He was a mountain to us Muslims, and what he did for Islam. So I just want to correct that, Michael, just in case.
But Michael, just a standard of that, I just want you to get a copy of this book, Authentication of the Hadith, Redefining the Criteria. It deals with that particular hadith in details by Dr. Israr Ahmed Khan, which basically leads to the different categories of hadith. But even if that is the case, that hadith is authentic, you compare that and you juxtapose that with, for example, the Old Testament on war and the books of Moses, and indeed the books of Joshua, and certainly the end times, particularly in relation to the second coming of Christ. There's absolutely no comparison to the kind of sanguinary warfare where, for example, men, women, children are ordered to be killed by Yahweh in the Old Testament. You contrast that, you don't have something of that particular caliber or status in the Hadith or the Quran literature at all.
Sure. In the back, I mentioned Moses and the Medinanites. I think they're called Numbers 31.
Numbers 31:17, yeah.
Kill all the women and children, save for the girls who have not known a man. So,
but I'm saying I'm even willing to grant them that. You see, a lot of rabbis, like Rabbi Weiss, who is a friend of mine, and I think Rabbi Singer. I haven't chatted to Rabbi Tovia Singer, an Israeli, saying what their views are on the present genocide in Gaza or the present attacks by Israel. But a lot of these ultra-Orthodox rabbis would see these passages as historically specific. And I can grant them that. I'll be able to grant them that, provided you don't use that as a kind of a justification for what is happening on the ground being committed by the Israeli Defense Force. And a lot of these ultra right wings. So I'm willing to grant them that if they want to grant them. Of course, from a theological point of view, I can argue from the morality. But if you are saying, look, you don't support what Israel is doing, and these passages that are being invoked, like the Amalekite massacre, whether you can debate there was a moral atrocity or not in the Amalekite massacre, and Netanyahu invokes that for a particular reason. A lot of these ultra-Orthodox rabbis would say that he misappropriates it to justify his own sanguinary warfare. And I'm willing to grant them that. I'm willing to give them the benefit of the doubt on that particular issue. But the reality is that we've got nothing of that caliber and description in the Quran, or certainly in the hadith literature. And perhaps maybe we can have a schedule at one time just on these particular issues, peace and violence in the Quran and the hadith, and be willing to discuss that and look at a number of these passages.
Okay, well, and back to the aftermath of the Battle of Badr, if we may. Ibn Mas'ud comes across Abu Jahl, Jahl, right? Was he the father of arrogance or something, or father of ignorance? And I guess he's lost a leg. He's lying on the ground. I think the hadith, he talks back to him. He calls him tiny shepherd. I guess he's got his foot on his throat or something. He says, "You have your foot in an exalted place, tiny shepherd." He asks him who has won the battle. And Ibn Mas'ud says, Allah has won the battle, and Muhammad's won the battle. And he takes his sword and cuts his head off and presents it to Muhammad. So that's a little confusing whether that's.
What's the reference for that, Michael? What's the reference?
The reference for that is from Jean's Siratul Rasulullah. It's from this book here. Let me just get this book. It's from this book here. That's a reference. It's basically discussed in this book. I'll have to check up the page. But this is a translation by Ibn Ishaq, which is in Siratul Rasulullah. The translation is a poor translation by Alfred Jean. This is one of the oldest biographies. And what the story goes, something along the line, is that he called him a little shepherd. But Abu Jahl had committed war crimes in the Battle of Badr. He had killed people. And so the story goes is that Abdullah ibn Mas'ud looked for him. And when he came across him, Abu Jahl was the aggressor. Now, you have to go to that particular report that Abu Jahl, even in his wounded state, engaged in acts of aggression. And then Abdullah ibn Mas'ud struck off his head. Now, check the report in Jom. I'll have to obviously look up the page reference, but it's found here. In fact, if you can, I think it's, I had it marked. 3-3. This is 337. The names of the polytheists who were slain at Badr. I think to page 338. Yeah. Muad, Abdullah and Eli from Abdullah Musafi. The total number of Quraysh slain at Badr is given to us as 50 men, 532, the wound. But the point is, it's from this particular book. It's not in the hadith. It's in this book here. This is a lot of the material that is here that is questionable. But again, if you, for the sake of argument, state that it is historically accurate, which a lot of scholars have doubted, it basically shows that Abu Jahl was injured. And in that injured state, the wounded state, he exhibited a form of aggression against Abdullah ibn Mas'ud. Check the report itself. Then he called him, "You shepherd, you climbed high," or something along that line, and that's when he struck him off. So it's not a question where he's begging him for mercy and saying, "Give me mercy," and now the guy kills him, or the Sahaba kills him in cold blood. It's basically in the context of the aggressive warfare, and he was an individual that engaged in aggression against the Muslims at Badr, and he was he was a soldier. He was not an innocent bystander. He was a soldier that engaged in aggression. So I can understand that story and that narration is there. I haven't seen that narration anywhere else in Bukhari or Muslim that I have to see, but it is here in this particular book but this is a translation by Jean. And again, a lot of the narrations and the narratives contained here are subject to also scrutiny and question. In certain instances, this is based on an earlier work, because what you've got here is the recension of Ibn Hisham, which is the recension of Ibn Ishaq done by Ibn Hisham. So again, it's about 200 to 250 years later. And then you've got it compiled and translated by Alfred Jom that narrates some of these particular stories. And Jom was by no means a friendly Orientalist towards Islam. He went out of his way to have a critical view and approach and presentation on Islam. So that's what I can say in relation to that. But I mean, he was an enemy combatant. And even at the time when he was caught and found out, there was hostility in his wounded state towards Abdullah ibn Mas'ud. So this is the issue. And then subsequently he struck off his head in relation to that in the context of warfare. So that's the issue that I can explain.
Okay.
Does that make sense to you?
Sure,
Michael.
sure. That's an excellent explanation.
Okay, we've got some questions. Michael, as you take your phone call, we have to end the show maybe in about 10, 15 minutes because Brother Yusuf has to pray. I have to pray.
Yeah, of course.
There are some questions from the audience. If I can just quickly go through them and then we can get back to Michael. First one is from our brother Mehdi Ahmedi. I do apologize for that, brother. Here it is. Can Brother Yusuf provide a response to the following? If the ICJ rules on the guilt of Israel, can any other country bring a similar or more pressing charge to the ICJ that's binding and more merely moral?
Yeah, that's happening right now. That is happening right now as we speak. I'm just trying to get this report. Indonesia, I think it's Indonesia. Let me just confirm this with you. Let me just get the news report. I saw a news report. Was it on Haaretz? Yeah. This is it. This is on our local papers, and I think you can check it. Indonesia, right now at this particular juncture, is in the process of taking Israel to the ICJ over the illegal occupation of Palestine. This is basically going to be a separate case, but it's a separate case initiated from the one by South Africa. But they are taking them to the ICJ pertaining to the aspect of the occupation at this particular juncture. The ICJ is scheduled to conduct these public hearings on the 19th of February. So it's coming up on the 19th of February at The Hague, where the parties will then present their perspectives on the legal consequences of Israel's occupation of the Palestinian territories. The General Assembly also at this, I think a couple of weeks back, adopted a resolution in December that the ICJ provides a kind of a non-binding advisory opinion on that particular matter. So the advisory opinion is not the same as the ICJ court decision, but it's a kind of an unquote moral binding. So Indonesia, as it stands now, is taking Israel to the ICJ on its occupation. Germany, on the other hand, is getting involved in opposing the application for South Africa. So a number of states can get involved. In fact, I believe, I'm just trying to think, there have been a number of states that have been piggybacking or supporting South Africa's application. Let me just see if I can get the report. ICJ application. There are a number of states that have been supported the application, but the point is that this is the thrust of the application that is before the ICJ, which has been brought by South Africa, and that has basically categorized and has laid down the foundation in terms of why it believes that Israel is committing genocide. So that case itself cannot be duplicated, in a manner of speaking. You can support that process, but you can bring other adjacent matters to the ICJ against Israel at this particular juncture. And Indonesia is doing that. And that hearing will be in February. So if you can type in, check in the news reports on Google, just type in Indonesia to bring Israel to the ICJ. It'll give you a list of reports by the Indonesian government. And I believe that that's going to be held in February. So this is going to be mounting pressure on the states, on the state of Israel.
Sure.
And Israel will obviously have to be basically respond to that. At present, there are 193 members of the United Nations, 193. So the court doesn't have jurisdiction to deal with applications from individuals, NGOs, corporations, or private entities, but it can deal with applications brought by member states. So it's one member state, South Africa, bringing a case against another member state, Israel. Right now, you may have heard that there are some private lawyers in South Africa that are attempting. I don't know how they're going to do it, and don't ask me about the procedure they're going to follow, because I'm sure that may not work. They want to take the United Kingdom and the US as being complicit in war crimes in relation to what is happening in Israel. And apparently they are making mention of taking this up to the federal court in the United States and the Supreme Court in the UK. I don't know anything about how the civil procedure or criminal procedure, of course, is an overlap with us, but I don't know how it works in the United Kingdom, so I can't comment on that. But how they're going to proceed with this, I have no idea. But as I know right now, there are private South African lawyers that are pursuing that line of holding the United Kingdom and the United States government as complicit to the genocide in Gaza. They are not taking this to the ICJ because they're individuals, but they are taking this up to the respective courts in the United Kingdom and the federal courts, I think, in the US. How that will happen, I don't know. Who's going to hear it? I have no idea. What procedure they're going to follow, I don't know. But check that up. You can. It's. I think it was covered by one of your news reports as well.
Sure.
That's basically what's happening. To answer the brother's question, Indonesia is proceeding, and they're proceeding in February.
Fantastic. Just a quick fire of questions. Should Hamas also be put before the ICJ? I think you discussed that at the beginning.
Yeah. No, they can't. Hamas can't be brought to the ICJ. They're a non-state actor. They are not a party to the proceedings. They've never signed the Genocide Convention. They're not a member state of the United Nations. And they've got no autonomy, although Israel would like to believe that they were a government on their own. They've got no autonomy. If you want to take on Hamas, then you can take them to the International Criminal Court for war crimes, but not to the ICJ for genocide. Legally, it won't work. Yeah.
Okay. What happens to what's going to happen if I'm saying is the ICJ is going to issue an order for Israel to immediately stop, but Israel will ignore it and carry on regardless? That's an interesting question.
I think that, and I think I've dealt with it. There is a possibility. That could in fact happen. The normal issue is that if there's an ICJ ruling, the normal proceeding is that if the state desists from engaging in same, then the matter goes to the General Assembly, and then eventually the decision can even go at Security Council level, where a ruling can be made or resolution can be passed for military intervention by a neutral party that then comes into the area and takes over the land. The problem with that is that you've got the United States, you've got the UK, you've got Russia, you've got China as permanent members of the Security Council, and in all probability they're going to veto. And so, how do you go past that? Because that would be the normal. If you've got a rogue state out there, and there's a ICJ makes an order, and now we need to do something. This goes to the General Assembly. Then there needs to be a final decision made at the Permanent Security Council. But you've got these member states that are members of the Permanent Security Council that have got the power to veto any decision made. So what do you do in a situation like that? See, what will happen is that it'll be highly unlikely if the ICJ makes a ruling, the member states of the European Union and the countries in Europe would not want to be seen on the side of Israel against the decision made by the ICJ. So Canada, for example, has made it clear that it respects and supports the decisions of the ICJ. Europe would want to also not be viewed as being antithetical to the ICJ, the various countries. And again, the ICJ itself is on trial, as many. Professor Francis Boyle made the point that the ICJ is also on trial. Why is it on trial? Because essentially, if it makes a ruling that just simply dismisses the application by South Africa, what message is going to be sending to the rest of the world, the rest of the civilized world, or what you would call the global South as opposed to the global North? It's going to be basically saying that an imperial power, which Israel is because it's an extension of that imperial power to settle a colony occupation itself.
That's good.
It's just simply an extension of that. So it means that imperial power can do what it wants to and get away with it. So the ICJ is on trial in relation to that. And I don't think anything can happen. I can't predict what's going to happen. I'm not good at prediction. But from what I've seen international law experts saying, it's unlikely that in the interim proceedings they're going to rule in favor of Israel. And they will invariably pass a ruling that Israel has to cease with its hostilities on the basis that its actions could very well constitute acts of genocidal intent and certainly genocidal acts in its general nature. Of course, the eventual decision of genocide will be the decision that is being made by the ICJ in a couple of years' time. That'll be a long hearing. I mean, if you look at the International Criminal Tribunal for Rwanda and the International Criminal Tribunal for the former Yugoslavia, I mean, those were long proceedings over a number of years, and there were people that came and testified, and individuals that were prosecuted, eventually the ICC. So it's a long procedure. So we don't know how far this will go. Is there a chance that judges are compromised by Israel? Well, I don't think there's a direct conspiracy, if you want to look at it. But I mean, look at the judges. The chair is from the United States. You've got the United Kingdom. You've got France. You've got Australia. You've got Canada. You've got Uganda. You've got Russia and China that may possibly want to abstain in view of the allegations made against them. That's like 8 nations there. 8 nations. And so these obviously from their respective countries, they are supposed to be neutral. Will they choose to remain on the side of neutrality, or will they eventually opt to make a decision which is more in line with policy? Because very much this is a political body. As much as it's a court of justice, it's very much a political colony, a political development that, comes out of the relics of the Second World War. It's not like a court system between 2 private individuals engaged in a dispute. I mean, then you don't take part of, you look at the merits of the case. But I mean, this has long-term implications, because if, for example, it finds that Israel has committed a genocide, then the United Kingdom and the United States will be complicit in genocide as well, because they basically armed the process, and they've heavily influenced public policy in relation to the state of Israel, not just in arms, but in their policy declarations over the years, in their funding over the years. I mean, just during mid-October, Rishi Sunak came out of the private plane. I don't know if you saw the picture, Brother Mohammed and Michael, where he came out of the private plane, seeing the Israeli ambassador to Britain, I think the lady, I forget her name, Itzi, I don't know what her name is, but meeting her on the grounds of Tel Aviv, but coming out of a military plane, not out of a normal plane where prime ministers come on official visits, coming out of a military plane and giving more arms and arming Israel to engage in this kind of insane sanguinary warfare. So what does that tell you? What does that tell you about this government and other governments in the past? So this is the problem that you've got. So the implications for the judges is that they're also caught between the devil and the deep blue sea. Any judgment or decision has implications for them and their countries, which obviously put them there in the first place as well. I mean, they come from their respective countries. They come from although they're supposed to be independent, but again, we can never know. We leave it to God at the end of the day, and certainly we can hope and pray that they will be as neutral as possible.
Thank you, Brother Yusuf, for answering those quick fire questions. Appreciate that. Michael, thank you for joining us. I think I've got your email. I have got your email, Michael. I'll definitely contact you maybe in the next couple of days. And I still don't understand what your stance is. You've come on this show quite a few times. Are you pro-Israel, or are you on the fence? What's your position?
Yeah, I'm neutral over Israel-Palestine. I wonder, do you guys think they should have taken UN Resolution 181 back in 1948? I see there was a rally in Chicago, and it was kind of interesting. There was like an older guy and then like 3 young guys there. And the guy interviewing him was like, well, what do you want? What do you want? And the young guys are saying, from the river to the sea. But the older guy was like, we want pre-67 borders. They wanted he wants a 2-state solution. I don't know.
That's not going to work. You know what, Michael, just quickly, the 2-state solution, Rashid Khalidi stated that that door is shut, and Israel doesn't want it as well. But what I would say, ideally, an ideal situation would be that just like apartheid South Africa was disbanded, apartheid Israel has to be disbanded. The Knesset has to be disbanded. These individuals, Netanyahu and his gang, has to be tried for war crimes. Well, what you need to do is there then should be, Gaza's been decimated for what it is, but the Palestinians in Gaza, there should be no Gaza, there should be no Israel, no West Bank. There should be now one single unitary country. All of the parties need to come together, the Palestinians and the Israelis. They need to go for a fresh neutral elections, and whoever the parties are then basically gets to rule the single land. And call it Israel, call it Holy Land State, whatever you want to call it. But the Israelis don't want it, because at the end of the day, they may believe one day the Palestinians will outnumber them. And when that happens, there will no longer be a Jewish state. So therefore, they don't want it. But and they say the Palestinians don't want that, but they will only allow Palestinians to be there in a subordinate position. If they're equal, if the Palestinians in the West Bank, like the Israeli settlers in the West Bank, get the vote, it'll be game over. That's why they have to be kept in administrative detention. Even the laws that are imposed upon them when they're acts of criminality or when they are tried, the Palestinians on the West Bank have to be tried under administrative detention. They're kept under administrative detention. They are tried under emergency laws, which date back from the Second World War, as opposed to the Israeli settlers, which are tried under Israeli law. So this is a situation. An ideal situation would be the South African state, but we also had the West Bank and the Gaza Strip in South Africa. They were called the Bantustans. So, for example, what the apartheid government did, my area where I stay was formerly the Eastern Cape, that was a Bantustan known as Transkei. They had these kind of so-called Bantustan leaders. You had like Mangosuthu Buthelezi and Lucas Mangope, Baputa Tswane. These were Bantustans where they had the so-called autonomous ruling and autonomous leadership. And they gave the indication that they were in sort of autonomous control. And that's essentially what they relegated the Palestinians to. Therefore, the West Bank Palestinians see the Palestinian Authority as corrupt and being an extension of the Bantustan leadership that we had in South Africa. I mean, we had our own separate education, different schools. I couldn't go to a white school.
Right.
In Palestine, the Israeli Arabs have their own they've got their own Arab schools. People don't know that. They think everybody's got the vote, but they've got their own Arab schools in Israel itself. So in Hebron, we never had this in South Africa. In Hebron, the streets of Hebron, there's a street for Palestinians to walk in, the street for Israelis to walk in. There are certain cars of the Palestinians that cannot travel in certain roads in Israel. There are certain parts of the time of the night, if you're a Palestinian and you are found there, you can be shot or killed, which have done the IDF. And this is before the 7th of October. In South Africa as well, blacks after 6 o'clock in the night could not be in the city centers. Up until, I think, the mid-'80s, we couldn't go to white beaches. I couldn't go to a white school, and there was a white school where I stayed. So this is the situation that you've got there. So that's why I'm saying the only solution for this may not be the best. The only solution would be a disbandment of the apartheid state of Israel, total disbandment. And you have to have one. And we're not calling for Israelis to be kicked out. They are there. We can't do anything. The Israeli Knesset and the gangsters running the administration, yes, they have to be dealt with. But the Israelis and the Palestinians have to come together and have to create this single state where everybody has equal rights. And you've got a single constitution. In fact, as I understand, Israel doesn't even have a constitution. There's no constitution in Israel at this juncture.
So you would
Michael,
democratic state?
Michael,
absolutely.
One second.
I know times I'm going to leave, but I call for a fully fledged democratic state. The irony is that it calls itself a secular democratic state, but it's not. You see, you can't claim to be a state which is autonomous for Jews on the one hand and then still claim to be a democratic state. It's an oxymoron, totally. You can't have the two
They're
together.
clearly not secular.
One second, brothers. I do apologize. Our teacher, my beloved brother.
Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum salam.
Brother Yusuf, just wait for a few minutes. I want you to hear this, please, because I would like to respond to Michael, if you don't mind. And you see, I just joined you because Michael was talking about Resolution 181, which is the partitioning of the state for Palestinian and Israeli. So let me tell you something. I'm a Palestinian who was living under the occupation. And I'm one of those whom you call, let's say, one of those refugees who have no right to go back home anymore. Now, let me tell you something that you do not know about, things that you might never heard about in the news. You see, why people like yourself don't talk about the illegal settlement built on the Palestinian lands in West Bank? Why you are not talking about the humiliation of Palestinians in Israeli checkpoint, which they call Mahsum? Why don't you talk about United Nations resolutions, more than 70 United Nations resolutions that Israeli don't comply with, such as 1947 Resolution 181 that you spoke about, partitioning Palestine into two states, one Arab and one Jewish. The independence of the Palestinian Arab state continue to be unjustly obstructed, and the rights of the Palestinians flagrantly denied. Why don't you talk about Resolution 194 in November 1948, the right of the return of Palestinian refugees to Palestine? Why don't you talk about Resolution 242 in 1967, the illegal occupation of Israel?
Sure, we can talk about all that.
Let me finish, please, if you don't mind me, because I want everybody to hear this. This is what the world is covering. That everyone is blind from those facts. Resolution 242 in 1967, the illegal occupation of Israel to Palestine lands in West Bank. Resolution 904 in 1994, protecting the Palestinians in the occupied territories from the Israeli after the Abrahamic Mosque massacre. Why people like yourself don't talk about December 30, 2022, United Nations resolution against Israel at ICJ, which you are talking about. 87 country votes in favor, including China, Russia, against the illegal settlement and illegal occupation of Palestinian lands and the holy city of Jerusalem. Why I don't see people talking about United Nations Council, for its part, responded to the Israeli decision to annex East Jerusalem by issuing resolution number 478 in August 29, 1980, which included non-recognition of Israeli law regarding Jerusalem and called on countries to withdraw their diplomatic missions from the city. Also, resolution number 15/36 on October 28, 1981, declaring that any changes in the Jerusalem area are illegal and against international law, and that such action are obstacle to achieving just and comprehensive peace. United Nations Resolution 2334, issued on December 23, 2016, confirmed that Israeli establishment of settlement in the Palestinian territories occupied since 1967, including East Jerusalem, has no legal legitimacy and demands that Israel immediately stop all settlement activities and not recognize any changes to the June 4 borders, June 1967. United Nations Resolution 1974 said in point number 5, the Palestinian people have the right to regain their rights by all means in accordance with the United Nations Charter. It affirms the right of the Palestinian people to independence and sovereignty, and the right of the Palestinian people to self-determination, and the right to return to Palestine. Since the inception of the Security Council, USA used the veto right 88 times, and they vote 56 times out of 88 times in order to protect Israel from the veto. The superpower of the world in the past over 50 years used more than 65% to 70% of the votes to protect Israel and support them in killing daily innocent Palestinian civilians in Palestine. After signing the Oslo Accords on September 13, 1993, the Palestinians promised by Israel, by USA, by EU, by Russia, by United Nations, and the entire world, the eastern part of Jerusalem will be their future capital. And the Palestinian leaderships confirmed its firm position many times by saying there is no Palestine state without East Jerusalem as its capital, in accordance with the resolution of international legitimacy and the peace. Even the official American position supported the international position in occupied Jerusalem, which appeared in American message of reassurance to the Palestinians in October 1991, in which it stated, we do not recognize Israeli annexion, this extension of East Jerusalem on its expansion of its municipal borders. Russia confirms that it recognized West Jerusalem as the capital of Israel and East Jerusalem as the capital of Palestinian, which was confirmed by source in the Russian Foreign Ministry in December 2017. The US Congress reversed the international position on October 23, 1995, when its issued law stipulating the transfer of the US Embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem and the necessity of recognizing Jerusalem as the capital of the state of Israel. The two-state solution is being shut and dead long time ago. Benjamin Netanyahu just few days ago or a week ago, he bragged about how he has spoiled the Oslo Accord, and he was proud of it. I wonder why people like yourself or why Israel is playing victim. They are victimizing themselves always. I am as a Palestinian. I'm Palestinian, and Israel are killing us since 1947. And we never heard you or anyone in the world talking about it and condemn Israel for killing innocent Palestinians daily. Why you never speak about the reaction? Why you always speak about the reaction of the innocent Palestinians who they are tortured daily by Zionist Israeli, but people never speak about the action of Israeli, of the illegal occupation of Palestine that bring such reaction from Palestinian. Please come to Palestine and see for yourself how they treat Palestinians and tortured us. Please, we are inviting all of you to come and see the truth for yourself. Why can't United Nations stop Israeli killing innocent Palestinian civilians, mostly children and women, for the past 75 years? Why can't you punish Israel for violating more than 70 or 72 United Nations resolution, but you destroyed the entire Iraq for violating a couple of United Nations resolution? Israel, they violated more than 70 and nothing happened to them. Iraq for only 2, it's been totally destroyed. United Nations should ask the West why you consider Ukrainian defending their land against Russian invasion as a freedom fighter, but you consider Palestinian defending their land against Israel as terrorists. This is what we call hypocrisy and double standard. Do the Palestinians have the right to defend themselves? Because the West always say Israel has the right to defend itself. Do the Palestinians have the right to defend themselves when land was taken from them, homes were destroyed, when daily innocent civilian Palestinian children and women were killed, Palestinian homes were confiscated and demolished by Israeli, and when United Nations resolution on torture, on ethnic cleansing against the Palestinian, Israel failed, and so many other United Nations resolution against Israel failed. Did the Palestinians have the right to defend themselves when Israel turned on and off electricity, stop the water, stop food, stop fuel, stop medical aid, stop everything? They put Gaza on the biggest open air prison for the past 16 years, long before October 7 attack happened. You can't say open air prison actually in Gaza, because you go to prison if you did something wrong, if you commit a crime. It is the biggest open concentration camp in the world. If
brother, just quickly, Aladdin, I'll have to leave because we have to make salah, but you can continue this discussion. But I will have to go because our lights are going off. But thank you for that. I want to thank all of you for this engagement. I will have to leave. It's getting out of. I'm just going to miss my Maghrib, and certainly our electricity is going to go off shortly. But you can continue with the stream, and I'll certainly listen to it once it's uploaded on YouTube.
Thank you, Yusuf.
Thank you very much. Brother Michael.
Jazakallah khair, brother Yusuf.
All right.
You take care. All the best. Take care.
Have a good one.
Thank you, brother Dean. Are you with us for?
No, because I have to go, so I just said 5 minutes because it's almost 2:30 a.m. in my place.
Can I respond?
Just let me finish, please. Can you condemn Israel for killing more than 31 innocent Palestinians in Gaza, more than 10,000 kids and children suckling in Gaza?
Yes.
Yes or no? Do you condemn them?
Yes.
So do you consider what they have done to Gaza, it's genocide, ethnicity, killing or not?
Sure.
So that's very good. Have nothing else to say. Okay. I appreciate that because I have to go to bed. It's 2:30 a.m. Thank you very much.
You seem to call me a liar and a hypocrite.
No. I'm not calling you. I'm calling those who stop behind Israel and support Israel after all they have seen. I'm not calling you. I'm calling anyone, whoever support Israel, like US using the veto just to protect them in the name of killing Palestinians.
Sure.
I condemn you when you criticize Resolution 181, which I'm aware of as a Palestinian.
Yeah, I just asked if that would have been a better course of action to accept that. And I understand they want all the land, but it's kind of ironic. There was a rally in Tampa by pro-Palestinians, and the girl with the megaphone was yelling, "No peace on stolen land." And I about fell out of my chair laughing. I was like, I guess she's never heard of the Seminole Indians. She's standing on stolen land. You know, I'm an American. I don't know if you guys know that or figured that. So, you know, we obviously committed genocide against the Native Indians, the Native Americans. You know, it's unfortunate that the world isn't where it claims to be. But the reason I bring up like other genocides, obviously Rwanda, Srebrenica, you know, Milosevic was brought before the ICC. But it's pretty rare that any justice is really done. You know, when Russia invaded Ukraine, you were like, well, we didn't think this could happen anymore. Obviously, Saddam invaded Kuwait in 1990, and we kicked them out, but there was a lot of death and destruction. And then we pretty much occupied Iraq for 20 years and then went in again after 9/11. And yeah, millions of people were killed.
I really do think, Michael, as a Brit myself, and I'm an ex-veteran also, I served also. So I'm very aware that some of these wars were proxy wars. They weren't really wars to help the people. They were for resources and own financial gains of certain ministers and politicians, and to cover up other issues and hide, well, especially here in the UK, the media play a big role in hiding other issues. Right now, we've got the Epstein thing going on, and with a lot of people involved with this island, and that's not being covered right now. And I think it should be, because a lot of these politicians and famous people will be exposed of actually visiting these islands and doing despicable things to young people. But yeah, we can go on for such a long time. Sheikh Aladdin,
Can I say something to Michael before I go? Mr. Michael,
yeah, can I say something real quick before you start that?
Yes, please go.
You talked about settlements, and I just read a big article. Obviously, it was the 30th anniversary of the Oslo Accords. Time magazine had a, I think it was Time, maybe it was Newsweek, but anyway, had a whole article on how, you know, there were 100,000 settlers in the West Bank in 1993 when they signed the Oslo Accords. Now there's 700,000. So Israel's clearly breaking international law constantly. And again, maybe I'm too pragmatic. I think the solution is more go like PLO, you know, the Palestinian Authority is. I mean, I think Abbas is corrupt, but sometimes you got to like swallow your pride and take what you're given. And
No, Mr. Michael, let me tell you something. That's the issue. We Palestinians cannot swallow our pride. We live with our pride, or we die with our pride. Let me tell you something. Why Palestinians refused Resolution 181 in 1947? I'll tell you why. Will you accept a country without no borders? You can't have your own borders. You can't have your own military. You can't have your own electricity sources, all life sources. You cannot have your port. You cannot have your own airport. You cannot have your own passport. If you travel, let's say you are living in LA. If you travel from a city to another city in LA, you have to get a permit from the Israeli IDF if you can pass through to reach the other side of the town. You cannot move freely. You don't have any freedom. You cannot control your airspace. You do not have even your own passport. You don't have your own identity. You see, you have to lose your identity and live as a slave under them. So they totally control us. Will you accept such state if you are in my position? Please be honest.
Well,
please answer yes or no. Please. Yes or no. Will you accept to live as a slave in such so-called state, which is not a state? Do you know, for example, my family? I'm telling you about my family. My brother is living away from my other brothers, walking distance 5 minutes. They built the wall. For my brother to cross, they have a door in this wall. We as a Palestinians, we cannot cross this wall. If you are a Jew, you have the right. If you are a Palestinian, you have to travel very, very whole day and get pass dozens of checkpoints, get several permits, and when you reach your destination, they will tell you, no, you cannot cross, then go back. This is how they want us to live.
That's the current conditions. But if the Palestinians had accepted Resolution 181, you're saying they still wouldn't have had a state? The Israelis would still be in control of their movements within Gaza, within the West Bank. I think they were even, there was some land, up near the Golan Heights would have been considered Palestine. I'm not really sure how they would have got from Gaza to the West Bank. Maybe they would have dug a tunnel or something. But you asked me if they should have taken you.
I'm sorry, because Brother Muhammad wrote in private chat that he has to go in a couple of minutes, and I have to go as well. I'm sorry, Mr. Michael.
Okay. Yeah.
I'm listening.
I do apologize, Sheikh Aladdin. We want to join, but I said, unfortunately, I have to pray, and I'm already late.
Maybe you can talk some other times with Mr. Michael whenever they come online. Please just come and we can discuss again. Thank you very much, Sheikh Muhammad.
Nice
Michael. Mr. Michael.
Thank you, Michael. Thank you, Sheikh. Assalamu alaikum. May Allah protect and preserve you and your family and make it easy for Aladdin. Aladdin, my heart goes out to our brother, our elder, and his family, what they're going through there in Palestine and in Gaza. I know he's lost a lot of family members and relatives, and this is real time, brothers and sisters. So our thoughts and prayers are with the people of Gaza and Palestine, and the difficulties that they're going through. Every time I turn the news on, it's quite sad and depressing. Some of the images of young people and children and women and so forth going through hardships, and I can't imagine it. And as I mentioned previously before, myself, I actually worked for the United Nations for a number of years, and I was deployed in various countries around the world, and I had first-hand experience of offering humanity. I don't want to come to tears, guys, but just giving a bottle of water to somebody and the joy on their faces. And then us, we just have to turn the taps on, like Michael did a couple of times, to get a drink. Just open the fridge and crack open a can of fizzy pop. But when you're in operations and deployed to countries where you have to help the masses with water and so forth, it's heartbreaking. But Michael, thank you so much for joining the show. It's been a very interesting show, and I appreciate your honesty and your compassion and your empathy. Really appreciate it. And I just want to remind the audience that we do regular streams. I'm just going to highlight the ticker there at the bottom. On Tuesdays, we have an Arabic only show, 7 p.m. every Tuesdays. Wednesdays, 8 p.m. And then 9 o'clock on Sundays for our Christian audience. Is Jesus the only true God? And of course, we had that topic last night, and it's very fruitful. So please continue to like and subscribe to all the 3 channels. I do apologize to the brothers in the backstage. We have to wrap it up. Once again, I'd like to thank our Lord, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the Most High, for giving me this opportunity to talk to you and to be here and to be in a safe place. And then I'd like to thank our brothers and sisters in faith and in humanity. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for your respectful behavior. Michael, once again, thank you so much. You're one of our elders, and it's nice to have you here. And we all can learn from you also. So any final words from you, Michael, out of respect? You're one of my elders. So just say Assalamu alaikum to everybody.
No, well, thank you guys very much. It was educational. Yusuf seems to have a lot of knowledge. Certainly has a lot of books behind him. It was good he could just grab a book. I didn't know the reference. It was something I had read online, I believe. But peace to everybody. Hopefully things get better in the near future.
Fantastic. Thank you, Michael. Thank you, everybody. Thank you to the mods. And Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. There's only me remaining now. So Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.